Chapter 476. When the sun rose in the early morning, the soft sunlight shone through the gap of the window and turned into a beam of pale golden light falling on the bed. White Lotus was wrapped in the quilt, curled up into a ball and slept. Her slender eyelashes flickered occasionally, and her face was slightly pale. She looked like a frightened kitten, slightly trembling in her dream. When the ray of sunlight finally moved to her eyes, perhaps it was because of the dazzling light, or perhaps it was because of the warmth, Bai Lian's body suddenly trembled. She cried out in surprise and sat up abruptly. She opened her eyes wide and looked forward. What came into view was the familiar furniture of the house, the white walls, the tables and chairs. White Lotus stared blankly for a while, and her originally rapid breathing gradually calmed down, as if she had broken free from that nightmare. She reached out her hand and gently touched her forehead. Then she lifted the quilt and got out of bed. She walked to the table and poured a glass of water. She didn't care that it was the cold water from last night and drank it in big gulps. There was a faint movement in the yard outside the house. White Lotus glanced outside. After hesitating for a moment, she tidied up her clothes, walked to the door, opened the door and walked out. The warm sunlight suddenly sprinkled on her slim body. The dazzling golden light made her slightly squint. After a while, she saw that in the yard, Lu Chen and Old Ma were standing there talking, but Atsu was nowhere to be seen. He was probably still sleeping in the house. Seeing White Lotus come out, Lu Chen and Old Ma stopped talking and smiled at her. Then Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and turned to leave. But he seemed to think of something and turned to Lu Chen and said, I can help you investigate, but those things in the past, how can I take care of them one by one? Let's forget about it. Lu Chen nodded slightly, and his face was also calm. He said, I understand. It's okay. Don't worry. Old Ma smiled and turned to walk out. White Lotus walked over slowly. After watching Old Ma's figure disappear from her sight, she said to Lu Chen, What does he want to help you investigate? Why does it sound so weird? It's just an old matter of adulthood. It's nothing important. Lu Chen waved his hand and said nonchalantly. At the same time, he looked her up and down and smiled. Did you sleep well last night? White Lotus said. Very good. I fell asleep as soon as I went to bed, and slept until dawn. If you don't sleep for several days and nights, you'll probably end up like this too. Lu Chen's eyes flickered as he looked at White Lotus. What's wrong? Is there something on your mind? White Lotus nodded, but she did not say what was on her mind. Instead, she stared at Lu Chen and said, Can I follow you to do something today? Lu Chen was stunned. Just as he was about to say something, he heard White Lotus say again, The order for me to follow you was also given by your Shizuan, my uncle master, perfected Lord Tianlan. This shouldn't be a problem, right? Lu Chen was silent. Then he sighed and said, All right. Fu Yunji had captured a total of 12 surviving members of the devil cult during the battle in the underground palace of the Immortal City. Now, all of them were imprisoned in the prison specially prepared for the captives of the devil cult. As the new disciple of perfected Lord Tianlan, Lu Chen's public mission was to deal with the sinister and vicious devil cult. Therefore, on this day, he brought White Lotus to this prison again. The first time he came here, it was Old Ma and Su Qingjun who followed him. This time it was all changed. She became a white-clothed girl who looked exceptionally beautiful and had the temperament of a fairy. However, from the strange looks of the prison guards, it could be seen that White Lotus's temperament did not seem to be too harmonious with this place. This dirty, dark and stinky place where evil was imprisoned seemed to be of a completely different world from the most beautiful fairy in people's imagination. However, White Lotus did not seem to care about this. She calmly followed Lu Chen into this dark place. At Lu Chen's request, the guards brought them to the room that was used to interrogate prisoners, which was the so-called interrogation room. As for the prisoners, of course, they were the surviving members of the devil cult who had been captured recently. However, after careful questioning, the leader, Chen He, was seriously injured and unconscious and could not be interrogated for the time being. There were also 6 or 7 people, so in the end, only 5 people could be brought over. While the others were waiting outside, Lu Chen and White Lotus were also sitting in this interrogation room. Then, they looked at the various torture instruments stained with dark red blood around them and looked at each other speechlessly. A faint smell of blood seemed to permeate this place, causing people to feel nauseous. It also caused people to feel a chill down their spines. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and whispered to White Lotus, "This place is not suitable for you. Why don't you go back first?" White Lotus slowly shook her head and said, "I will help you here." Lu Chen frowned and said, "What will you help me with?" White Lotus looked at him and said softly, "I can help you with anything you want to do." Lu Chen frowned even more and said, "What are you thinking?" White Lotus took a step forward and looked at Lu Chen and said, "No matter what you want me to do, I can help you. But can you please tell Martial Uncle Tianlon that I still have some use for you when you see him later?" Lu Chen suddenly became silent. After a long while he smiled bitterly and said, "There is no need to do that, I don't want to die." White Lotus suddenly interrupted him. She stared at Lu Chen's eyes and suddenly grabbed Lu Chen's hand. She held it tightly and said word by word, "Do you dare to tell me that Martial Uncle will definitely not kill me?" Lu Chen was speechless. White Lotus's body trembled slightly and then she slowly lowered her head and said, "He publicly accepted you as his disciple. It means that he is no longer afraid and doesn't have to worry about anything. I am probably useless to him, right?" She gritted her teeth and suddenly her eyes became a little red. She whispered, "I am only 14 years old. I don't want to die." Lu Chen forced a smile and pulled his hand out of her soft palm and said, "There is no evidence. Maybe you are thinking too much. By the way, look at your second senior brother. He is fine. I am a Wuxia talent." White Lotus's face was pale and she said in a trembling voice, "Wuxia, if I can't be his disciple, then in the future, he will think about the dead senior brother every day and leave behind a rare Wuxia talent disciple. If it were you, what would you do?" Lu Chen's mouth squirmed, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Some truths, in fact, everyone understood it in their heart. They just pretended not to understand until others tore off the disguise and put the cruel and bloody facts in front of them. Dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door. White Lotus wiped her eyes and walked over to open the door. At the same time she murmured, "Let me help you. In this world besides you, who else will he listen to?" Lu Chen stood in the same place, silent. When old Ma arrived outside the prison, it was the time of the day when the sun was at its brightest. However, standing at the entrance of the prison, the chilly wind that blew out from inside still made people shiver in their hearts. It was a bit bone-chilling. However, he didn't enter the prison because Lu Chen and White Lotus also came out at this time. When old Ma was about to speak, he found that both of their faces didn't look good. Old Ma looked at them suspiciously, then he pulled Lu Chen aside and whispered, "Are you okay?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and looked at White Lotus, then he sighed and said, "I'm fine." Old Ma followed his gaze and was suddenly startled. He saw White Lotus standing alone under a tree over there. She looked as cold as usual, but for some reason, it always made people feel a little strange. After a moment, Old Ma suddenly frowned and his eyes swept over White Lotus. He saw that the hem of her white dress was stained with blood in several places. Even her soft and white palms were dyed dark red. It was a ghastly sight. Old Ma's heart suddenly jumped and he subconsciously swallowed his saliva. Looking at the silent figure of the girl, he casually asked, "Did you find out anything?" Lu Chen said, "Yes." In the distance, under the sunlight of the tree, White Lotus raised his head and looked at the scattered rays of sunlight sprinkling down from the dense branches and leaves. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and then seemed to feel a chill in his body, and his body trembled. Chapter 477. At the entrance of the prison far away, a few Fuyunji prison guards were watching from afar. Although there was a distance between them, one could still see the strange and complicated expressions on their faces. And most of their gazes were on White Lotus, who was quietly standing under the big tree. White Lotus seemed to be unaware of the gazes from the outside. She squinted her eyes and looked up for a while. Then she pulled out a silk handkerchief and started to wipe her hands. The red bloodstains dyed the white silk red, making the handkerchief dirty. But the bloodstains on her palms only lightened in color. She was unable to wipe them clean. White Lotus wiped them hard, bit by bit, as if she was very patient. Old Ma frowned, retracted his gaze and said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "What did you get from her?" Lu Chen said, "There are 3 secret nests of the evil faction in Immortal City that we didn't know about before. And there are more than 20 spies lurking in Immortal City." Old Ma said, "The previous incident was so big, these evil faction remnants that we didn't catch most likely all ran away?" Lu Chen nodded. He had obviously thought of this as well. That's true. We've been delayed here for a few days, so I'm guessing that a lot of them have escaped. However, some of them are single-person contacts, and they're well-hidden spies. If we don't contact them, they might not make a move. Old Ma nodded and said, "This is a good harvest. Usually it's hard to get information out of them." As he spoke, he turned his head to look under the big tree. After a moment of hesitation, he asked Lu Chen in a low voice. How did she ask? Is her method very powerful? On the word, powerful, Old Ma intentionally or unintentionally emphasized it. Lu Chen also understood what he meant. He said in a deep voice, "Very powerful." Old Ma sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked surprised and said, "She is such a delicate little girl and grew up in an aristocratic family. How could she know this kind of method?" "Who knows?" Lu Chen shook his head and muttered. At the same time, the scene of him and Atsu meeting White Lotus for the first time on Kunlun Mountain suddenly appeared in his mind. At that time, in the deep forest, the wild beasts were covered in wounds and blood. It was a terrible sight to behold. Even now, when he recalled that scene, Lu Chen seemed to be able to smell a strong stench of blood. Old Ma saw that Lu Chen's expression was a little ugly, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he shook his head and said nonchalantly, "I'm fine." Old Ma did not pursue the matter. He changed the topic and asked, "These are all trivial matters. What about Elder Gue? Did you find out the whereabouts of that person?" "No." Lu Chen said, "I did ask, but even in the evil faction, that old tortoise only contacted Chen He. All the other evil faction evil people have never seen this person." Old Ma was taken aback. His face turned a little ugly and said, "This guy is very careful." These few years, the evil cult had been on the decline and they were also being chased by the True Immortal Alliance and the Fuyun Agency, these huge organizations. Therefore, it was not surprising that the only remaining elder ghost was exceptionally careful. However, as the highest-ranking elder in the entire evil cult, he was actually so cowardly that he only contacted one person. This still made one somewhat speechless. "Then we can only interrogate Chen He?" Old Ma asked. Lu Chen nodded and said, "Let's wait for him to wake up first." As he said this, he glanced at Old Ma and slightly raised his eyebrows. He said, "Didn't you say you were going to investigate that matter this morning? Did you find anything?" After hearing his words, Old Ma suddenly had a strange expression on his face. He first looked left and right, then pulled Lu Chen 2 steps to the side and whispered, "That woman's name, did you remember wrongly?" "Remember wrongly?" Lu Chen looked at him in astonishment. Then he frowned and thought carefully for a while. Finally he firmly said to Old Ma, "Yes, it is the name Song Hui." Old Ma sighed and said, "There is no woman with this name in Zheng Xianmeng's name list." "No." Lu Chen's expression changed. Old Ma nodded and replied with certainty, "I've looked through all the people with the surname Song, and there is no such name." Lu Chen fell silent for a while. It should be known that Zheng Xianmeng could almost be regarded as the most prosperous and powerful cultivator organization in history. In addition to the many extremely powerful cultivators, it relied on all kinds of comprehensive rules. All the cultivators who had joined Zheng Xianmeng would definitely be recorded in the name list. Therefore, if there was no Song Hui on the name list, there were only 2 possibilities. One was that Lu Chen remembered the woman's name wrongly. The other was that he remembered the woman's identity wrongly. Perhaps she was not from Zheng Xianmeng. This was also the situation Old Ma was thinking about. But after frowning and thinking for a long time, Lu Chen finally said to Old Ma with certainty, "If I remember correctly, that woman is indeed from Zheng Xianmeng." Old Ma spread out his hands helplessly. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly said to him, "There is another secret name list in Zheng Xianmeng." Old Ma was shocked and whispered, "Didn't you say she was not a shadow of Fuyunji?" Lu Chen nodded and slightly frowned. "I remember she is not. But just in case, can you help me to check again?" Old Ma showed an awkward expression and said, "That is a name list specially for you shadows. In the whole Sky Dragon Mountain, only Lord Immortal and Hall Master Xue Ying can read it. If I go there rashly..." Lu Chen looked at him and then slowly said, "Forget it, I will ask Xue Ying for it." After saying that, he turned around and left. But before he left, he looked back at White Lotus but saw that White Lotus did not look at them from beginning to end. She just stood there quietly and wiped her hands with a silk handkerchief. And now, the square silk handkerchief had completely turned red. Lu Chen came to the main hall of Fuyunji and asked someone to inform him that he wanted to see Xue Ying. But very soon, someone very politely came to tell him that Hall Master Xue Ying had gone down Sky Dragon Mountain early in the morning and had not returned yet. Lu Chen asked where Xue Ying went, but the people of Fuyunji just shook their heads that they did not know. It was said that the whereabouts of that person had always been mysterious. No one knew. Of course, no one dared to ask where she went. Lu Chen felt a little helpless, but he could only turn back. But when he passed by the courtyard of the Kunlun Party's experts, he stopped. After a slight hesitation, he walked in that direction. One of the houses in the row was where Su Qingjun was living. No matter what, Lu Chen still wanted to talk to this woman and at least explain what had happened that day. But just as he walked to the door of Su Qingjun's residence, he suddenly saw a slender figure walking towards him. She was charming and beautiful, and her eyes were like water. It was Song Wenji, whom he had not seen for a long time. At the same time, Song Wenji also saw Lu Chen. A smile immediately appeared on her face. Like a lotus leaf blown by the wind, she walked over with snake-like steps and stood in front of Lu Chen. She smiled and said, "Where are you going, junior brother Lu?" "You called me junior brother?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. Song Wenji laughed and said, "Isn't that normal? Your master, True Lord Tianlan, and my foster father, True Lord Tiehu, have been best friends for many years. I became his foster daughter much earlier than you, so it's not too much for me to call you junior brother, right?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and said, "Whatever." Song Wenji's charming eyes moved. Suddenly she smiled sweetly and said, "It's rare to meet you. My house is not far in front. Why don't you come to my house and have a cup of tea?" Lu Chen shook his head and was about to refuse. He said, "I'm sorry, Song Wenji covered her mouth and interrupted his words. She seemed to be in high spirits and in a good mood. She smiled and said, "I'll let you witness my tea ceremony skills. Oh yes, my tea is also good. Speaking of which, we are fated. It's your Kunlun Mountain's famous tea, Little Crane." Little Crane. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. After a while, he let out a long breath and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." Song Wenji giggled like a coquettish spring flower blooming. For a moment, her beauty was unparalleled. It was as if her whole person had brightened up. She pointed her fair finger forward and said, "It's just in front. Follow me." Chapter 478. Just as Lu Chen and Song Wenji were about to leave, they suddenly heard a squeaking sound coming from the door not far away, and then it was pushed open. Then, Su Qingjun came out. There were 2 stone steps at the door. Su Qingjun was standing on the stone steps and was about to go down when she saw the figures of Lu Chen and Song Wenji standing together. There was a hint of surprise on her face. Her eyes lingered on Song Wenji's charming face and enchanting figure for a moment, and then fell on Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He wanted to say something to Su Qingjun, but he didn't know what to say for a moment. He just smiled at her and nodded. Song Wenji, who was next to him, was also a smart and astute woman. At a glance, she could tell that the situation between the man and the woman seemed to be a little different. Her eyes flickered for a moment, then she smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Senior brother Lu, who is this?" Her words were spoken in an unusually gentle manner. Coupled with her watery eyes and gentle smile, she was truly charming but not obscene. She was a beautiful woman who could make anyone's eyes light up and feel tender affection for her. Lu Chen saw that Su Qingjun's face quickly became cold, and was speechless for a moment. After shaking his head slightly he said, "Let me introduce you, this is Su Qingjun of the Kunlun Party. Qingjun, this is junior sister Song Wenji of the Heavenly Law Hall of Zhengxianmeng. She is the adopted daughter of the Iron Pot Immortal. A while ago, she helped us track down the evil people in the Immortal City." He purposely emphasized the word, help. It was obvious that Song Wenji's previous help was actually a hindrance. However, Song Wenji didn't seem to hear this at all. She smiled at Su Qingjun and said, "Shiji Su, this is the first time we meet. I don't know if you have time now. Why don't you go have tea with us?" "Tea?" Su Qingjun frowned and glanced at Lu Chen. Song Wenji laughed and said, "That's right. It wasn't easy for me to invite senior marshal brother Lu to my place to drink tea. Moreover, the tea leaves are the famous little crane tea produced by your Kunlun sect. Senior marshal sister Su, you should come too." Su Qingjuan's face was indifferent. After looking at Lu Chen, she said with a trace of alienation, "Thank you, Miss Song, but I have something to do now. I will disturb you again when I have the chance in the future." With that, she turned to leave. But at this time the two women suddenly heard a cough from Lu Chen, and then they heard Lu Qingjun say Lu Chen, Song Chen to say I Lu Chen to say I you I to say I Chen Lu to Qing to say. There. I suddenly I Su to say I see Qing Su's Chen's to say too. And. Let's wait for next time. I'm sorry. Song Wenji's smile froze for a moment, then she looked at Lu Chen with a smile that was not a smile, and said, "Senior brother Lu, you are really a busy man." Lu Chen laughed dryly and walked towards Su Qingjun while waving his hand at her. After that, he smiled apologetically and said, "I'm really sorry, I really do have something to do. I'll treat you to a good meal in Immortal City next time." Song Wenji looked at the two people walking away one after another. The surprise on her face did not disappear. Thinking about it, ever since she grew up, especially after she became the adopted daughter of Taihu deity, it had been a long time since someone dared to stand her up, and the excuse was not at all reliable. She glanced at Lu Chen's back, and after a while, she suddenly smiled. She didn't seem to be too angry, and only nodded thoughtfully. Then, her eyes fell on Su Qingjuan's back, and her eyes gradually brightened. "Why are you following me?" After walking for a distance and seeing that there was no one around, and only Lu Chen was walking beside her, Su Qingjun stopped and said to him with a slight frown. Lu Chen also stopped, and after a moment of silence said, "Qingjun, I have something to say to you." Su Qingjuan's face was a little gloomy and cold, but it was hard to tell whether she was happy or sad. She only said indifferently, "What are you talking to me about instead of drinking tea and chatting with Beauty Song? Besides, didn't you just say that you have an important prisoner to interrogate in Fuyunji prison?" Lu Chen said, "I was just brushing her off." Su Qingjun suddenly clenched her teeth, looking a little angry, and said coldly, "So you lied to her? You always like to lie to people, and do everything you do. Lies come out of your mouth. That's why you were able to deceive me on Kunlun Mountain, and make me trust you so much?" Lu Chen opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but soon stopped. After a long while he said with a bitter smile, "If you want to say it like that, it doesn't seem wrong. More than 10 years ago, I was a shadow lying in ambush in the evil sect, and I lived this kind of life of lying to people all day long." Saying this, he shook his head, and his expression suddenly seemed a little bleak. He sighed. That kind of life is not easy. As a young boy, he had mingled with a group of vicious demons since he was young. He lived a precarious life, and no one knew when he would suddenly lose his life. How could such a life be easy? Just thinking about it made one's scalp tingle. Su Qingjun wasn't a stupid woman. She was very smart, so she quickly thought of Lu Chen's situation back then. This slightly moved her expression, and there was even a trace of pity in the depths of her eyes when she looked at Lu Chen. However, in the end, she was not a weak woman. After taking a deep breath, she shook her head and said in a low voice, "I know it has not been easy for you, but today, the bitterness has finally come to an end." With that, she turned around and was about to walk forward again. Lu Chen took a step forward to stop her. Su Qingjun frowned. "Is there anything else?" Lu Chen gazed at her clear and bright eyes. "Qingjun, it doesn't matter what you think of me, including that day in the prison. You feel that I was wrong for not saving that woman called Song Hui. That's up to you. But I only hope that you still remember, there are many lunatics among those evil sect evil people. In the future when you meet with these people, you must be careful, you must not be soft-hearted, otherwise in the end you will hurt yourself." Su Qingjun took a deep breath and looked at Lu Chen. "Thank you for your reminder. I will remember it. But I don't understand. Don't you feel the slightest bit of remorse for that woman?" Lu Chen fell silent. After a while he said softly, "To tell you the truth, I don't regret it." Su Qingjun glared at him angrily. Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief and said, "At that time, I was surrounded by demons of the devil cult. I couldn't save her. Even if I tried, I would have perished together with them. Moreover, I had another mission." "Really? Were you afraid? Su Qingjun said coldly. At that time, were you afraid of death? Lu Chen raised his head to look at Su Qingjun. He frowned slightly and his expression sank. After a while he said calmly, I don't think I'm afraid of death. If I was afraid of death, perhaps I wouldn't have stayed in the evil sect for so long and done so many things. Qingjun, you grew up in a peaceful family. You won't understand the situation of a shadow like me. If you were in that situation and saw me being captured and abused, then you would also. I will take action. Su Qingjun suddenly interrupted Lu Chen and said calmly. What? Lu Chen was stunned. I will save you, even if I have to die with you. Su Qingjun gazed deeply at him and walked forward without looking back. Chapter 479. A person's life is so long. There are bound to be crossroads. Sometimes you can choose, and sometimes you don't even have the chance to choose. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the gentle moonlight shone on the quiet yard. Lu Chen and Old Ma sat opposite each other. Atsu was lying at Lu Chen's feet, and White Lotus was nowhere to be seen. She should have gone back to her room to sleep. After listening to Lu Chen's words, Old Ma didn't seem to care and said, I don't think so. When will we really have the chance to choose? Lu Chen picked up the wine pot and poured himself a glass of wine. He said, You see, I have two places to sleep. One is the magnificent and spacious Kunlun Temple on the mountain, and the other is this obscure place with you, an eyesore. But I chose to live here. This is the choice we can make. You. Okay. Old Ma waved his hand and looked speechless. After a while, he suddenly asked, Don't you plan to talk to Su Qingjun? Lu Chen's hand that was holding the wine cup paused for a moment. Then he raised his head and drank it. He shook his head and said, No. Old Ma asked, Why? Everyone has different ideas. They can't be together. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched. There seemed to be a bitter smile. Then he sighed and said, Like we said before, we have come to a crossroad. I chose this path, but she chose the other one. What else can we do? In addition, I killed her brother on the mountain in Kunlun a few years ago. If she is with me, she will not be accepted by her parents and the whole Su family. So let's forget it. Old Ma nodded. He didn't look too surprised. It seemed that he had expected this result. He said, This is also good. You two are not very suitable for each other. If you separate, everyone will be more relaxed. Lu Chen lowered his eyes slightly and slowly poured himself a cup of wine. After a while he said in a low voice, Yeah, it's good to treat her this way. Anyway, all the women who were close to me are dead now. It was late at night, and the moonlight seemed to become a little cold. Old Ma yawned and stood up to go back to his room to sleep. Turning his head, he saw that Lu Chen was still sitting there in a daze. Old Ma patted him on the shoulder and said, What are you thinking? Go back to sleep. Lu Chen said, Nothing. I just thought that Su Qingjun said today that she would rather die together than to save me. I just felt a little emotional. Old Ma said, He hesitated for a moment and asked, Do you think that Su Qingjun said those words out of anger or will she really do what she said? Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, According to my understanding of her, if she said she will save, she will most likely do it. Old Ma said, Even if she was surrounded by evil sect demons at that time, even if there was no hope of saving people and she would almost certainly lose her life? Even so, she will still save people. Lu Chen nodded and said, Should be. I guess in her heart, she must be thinking that she can't bear to see the people important to her being abused and suffering. So she will do anything to help. Even if she is in a desperate situation, she will first relieve the pain of others. In the end, she will also lose her life by committing suicide. It's not worth it. Old Ma frowned and said, It is the first time I have heard of someone like her. Lu Chen looked at him and did not speak. Old Ma said, What's wrong? Could it be that after what Su Qingjun said to you, you also have some regrets about what happened that year? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I have already told her during the day, even if I have to do it again, my choice will still not change. I will still hide in the evil sect without saying a word until the end. Old Ma smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly heard Lu Chen said, But now I don't think that Su Qingjun is definitely wrong. Sometimes I will think, could it be that we have been shadows for too long? What we see, hear and think are all the same. Everyone said to be calm, to be patient, to look at the overall situation, to do whatever it takes for the final success. Even if we have to sacrifice ourselves, it doesn't matter. Doesn't it matter if the person sacrificed is ourselves or others? Yes, until today I still don't think I have done anything wrong, because the Battle of the Desolate Valley proved that my patience was worth it. But is Su Qingjuan's way of thinking necessarily wrong? If I were the one being abused and suffered, would I look forward to having a friend like Su Qingjun? I don't know, old Ma. I have never understood this matter. Old Ma was silent for a long time and said, "Forget it, don't think too much. That Miss Su is after all not the same kind of person as us." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, I also thought of this before I made up my mind. Qingjun is cold on the outside but warm on the inside, kind-hearted, as if she has been standing in the light since she was a child. She is so different from me, a shadow." Old Ma pulled him towards the house and said with a smile, "Looking at your emotional appearance, could it be that you feel that you are not worthy of that Miss Su?" Lu Chen smiled and then shook his head, saying, "I don't mean that, but I have lived in the shadow all my life and am used to the darkness. So from now on, let me help her with those dark, dirty and disgusting things. As for herself, she only needs to stand in the light." Old Ma couldn't help but laugh and looked at him mockingly, saying, "Tess, you have suddenly become like a saint, scaring me to death. Come on, in fact, it is rare for you to see a beautiful and clean thing, so you can't bear to dirty it. Don't talk so much nonsense. So many of us have died in the past, but I have never seen you soften your heart. In the end, isn't it because Su Qingjun is young and beautiful, you like her?" Old Ma swayed his fat body, put his hands behind his back and walked into the bedroom disapprovingly. At the same time he said, "In this immortal city, black is black, white will eventually become black, don't be wishful thinking." Lu Chen stopped in his tracks and remained silent. He raised his head to look at the night sky and saw that the moon was bright and clear. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that there were still dark clouds drifting through the moonlight. The next morning, Lu Chen woke up Old Ma and prepared to go up the mountain to the Floating Clouds Agency. There were two things he wanted to do. First, it was the secret name list in Shui Ying's hands. Second, it was to find out how to continue hunting down the remnants of the evil cult. This kind of top-secret list would never be seen by ordinary people. But now, Lu Chen's identity was completely different. As the well-known successor of Lord Tianlan, and it was obvious that that lord was doing his best to cultivate him. So Lu Chen's power and authority had increased rapidly overnight, even to the point where he could faintly compete with Shui Ying. Even Shui Ying was not willing to have an open conflict with Lu Chen at this time, so she readily agreed to Lu Chen's request. As Lu Chen's only good friend for many years, Old Ma's status had risen recently. He was very popular both inside and outside of Fuyunji, and everyone looked up to him. This made Old Ma very proud, and he worked very hard. Therefore, around noon that day, Old Ma, who was in charge of searching for the list, suddenly ran to Fuyunji to find Lu Chen. At that time, Lu Chen was discussing with Shui Ying how to investigate the spies who had confessed. After all, they could not rely on the one-sided story of the devil cult's demons to kill and capture them. What if those people were deliberately speaking nonsense? When Old Ma came in, there was a clear strange expression on his face. After bowing to Shui Ying, he walked to Lu Chen's side and said, "That woman called Song Hui, we found her but there's a problem." Chapter 480. After walking out of Fuyunji, Lu Chen said to Old Ma, "Did you see Shui Ying's expression just now?" Old Ma nodded. "She's probably curious too. After all, your identity is different now. She'll think more about everything you do. It's human nature. But are you really not going to avoid her?" Lu Chen said, "I can't avoid her. Although you and I have been working in Fuyunji for many years, we can't compare to her in terms of our foundation in Immortal City. As long as the damn Baldy doesn't really intend to replace this woman, we'll need her help for many things in the future. So we might as well make it clear to her. Even if we want to investigate the past, we won't be able to do so without alerting her." That's true. Old Ma seemed to be well aware of this situation. What he said just now was more like a reminder to Lu Chen. When they got close to the Kunlun Temple, Lu Chen looked around and saw that there was no one around. He asked, "What's the strange thing you mentioned just now?" Old Ma said, "I found Song Hui's name on Fuyunji's secret list. But in the records, Song Hui shouldn't be from Fuyunji. Lu Chen was startled, a trace of surprise on his face. Old Ma smiled bitterly and said, "You've also figured it out. The secret list in Shui Ying's hands is commonly known as the shadow list in our Floating Clouds agency. The names on it are all the most secret of shadows. But Song Hui's identity is a female disciple of Zheng Xianmeng's Grand Chancellor in the past. Apart from dying at the hands of the devil cult, there's almost nothing unusual about this woman's life." Lu Chen's brows slowly furrowed. He said, "It's not the Floating Clouds agency's shadow, and there's nothing out of the ordinary about her. However, her name was included in this most secretive list?" Old Ma nodded with a hint of hesitation on his face. Lu Chen saw his expression and said, "What's wrong? What are you trying to say?" Old Ma said in a low voice, "Those who are on the shadow list will have their traces secretly erased by Fuyunji. In other words, if Song Hui doesn't have many friends and relatives, it's unlikely that anyone will remember her after a decade. Even if someone tries to investigate, they won't be able to find anything." Lu Chen fell silent. After a moment, he suddenly exhaled softly and said, "Just like me." Old Ma nodded and said, "Just like you. If one day he succeeded and survived, he might become famous in the world. However, if he gave up halfway and failed on the verge of success, then all his achievements, all his fame, even if he was a flesh and blood person, would eventually become a name on the list of shadows hidden in the darkness. But if he gave up halfway and failed on the verge of success, then all his achievements, all his fame, even if he was a flesh and blood person, would eventually become a name that would never see the light of day. The world had always been so cruel, even more so for the shadow in the dark. But why would a woman who wasn't a shadow be recorded on this list?" Old Ma pondered and said, "Could it be that Song Hui is actually a shadow, but her identity is too important, so she needs to hide it?" As soon as he finished speaking, he began to shake his head, probably feeling that his words didn't make sense. Next to him, Lu Chen also shook his head and said, "That's impossible. The shadow list is the most secretive thing. Those who can be written on it are real people. There's no need to fake it." Old Ma sighed, nodded, and remained silent. Lu Chen frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he asked, "How does it record Song Hui's identity and how she died?" "When she was alive, she was a tax collector in the Dezayuan. On weekdays, she would be sent to some local industries to collect taxes. There are hundreds and thousands of tax collectors in the Dezayuan. They are the most ordinary people." As he said this, Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said, "As for how she died, it's very simple. She was robbed by the devil cult's demons on the way to collect taxes. She couldn't defeat them and was taken away. In the end, she was tortured to death." Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he asked, "What about her family? Are they still alive?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "They're all gone. Song Hui's parents had passed away before she was killed. She was also alone with no relatives." Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. Old Ma immediately felt it and frowned. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen closed his eyes, and the muscles on his face twitched slightly. He seemed to be in pain. Perhaps he was forced to recall those unpleasant memories again, which made him feel depressed and uncomfortable. After a while he whispered, "There's something wrong." For some reason, Old Ma suddenly became nervous and asked, "What is it?" Lu Chen took a deep breath and said, "Recently, I've been thinking about that incident. What left the deepest impression is not her name, but I remember that when a devil cult's demon was beating her, he seemed to know her a little. He laughed wildly and shouted that he would catch her sister in the future, and the two of them would be together. At that time, Song Hui was in a daze and was on the verge of death. When she heard this, she suddenly seemed to have regained her consciousness. She screamed and fought with the demon, but of course, she couldn't beat him and was killed in the end." Old Ma was stunned and couldn't speak for a while. Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma and said indifferently, "Song Hui does have a younger sister. She purposely made a mistake in the list." The two stood in front of the Kunlun Hall and looked in the direction of the Fuyunji Hall in front of them with different expressions. For a long time, they didn't speak. This matter can't be investigated from Fuyunji anymore. After a long time, Lu Chen finally spoke. He looked at the solemn and majestic Fuyunji Hall in the distance and said to Old Ma. Old Ma stood beside him with a complicated expression. After a moment of hesitation, he said in a low voice, Why don't we stop the investigation? I feel that there's something strange about this matter. Don't make a big mess. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "We still have to investigate. It's fine if I don't remember or care about it in the past, but now that I think about it, I always feel that I owe that woman a little. If I give up now, I won't feel at ease. Just treat it as helping me pay off my debt." Old Ma sighed and said, "Okay, but we can't investigate for Yunji anymore. What are you going to do?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "We can only go to the Dazeyuan. Don't alarm anyone. Just find some old people who have been in the Dazeyuan for more than 10 or 20 years and ask around to see if anyone still remembers Song Hui." He paused for a moment. After a moment, his eyes suddenly flashed and he said, "In addition, we have to ask about her sister. I have a feeling that Song Hui's erased sister may be the key to this mess." Chapter 481. Everything was chaotic and noisy, but the general situation of the world was as calm as before. Even after the explosion in the Immortal City, the scene was fiery and the casualties were heavy. It made the evil cult, which had been on the decline for a long time, suddenly become the focus of attention again. But in fact, this did not change or help the evil cult's momentum and actual situation. On the contrary, on the side of Zhengxian Meng and Fuyunji, with the entrance of the underground palace that Lu Chen accidentally found, broke through the old nest that the evil cult had been operating in the Immortal City for many years, killed and captured many remnants of the evil cult. Except for the most mysterious leader Elder Ghost who was still on the run, it could be said that the evil cult's power in the Immortal City had been defeated in one fell swoop. Decades of hard work went down the drain. The result of this battle could be said to be unforgettable pain for the evil cult. However, Fuyunji did not relax because of this. After fighting with the evil cult for many years, they were experienced and their methods were ruthless. They had a deep meaning of extermination. Many of the evil cult's captives who were captured alive were questioned in Fuyunji's prison. Naturally, there were some punishments that could not be known by outsiders. In short, the result was that, after a few days of silence, Fuyunji once again launched a large-scale operation and carried out a thorough sweep of the remaining evil cult spies and hidden forces in the Immortal City. This was a swift, ferocious, and thorough sweep. During this period, there were even quite a few spies caught within the true Immortal Alliance. There were quite a few people who usually didn't reveal any flaws, but this time, they were exposed by the confessions of the captives. These spies were all over the halls of Zhengxian Meng. Although the total number was not particularly large, there were only a dozen of them, but even so, it was enough to shock people. In this storm-like arrest process, naturally, there were people who cried injustice, some people were filled with righteous indignation, some people angrily rebuked, saying some heart-wrenching words, expressing their loyalty to their sex immortals. There were also some who accused Fuyunji of making a fuss, taking the opportunity to eliminate the strength of other immortals and so on. In short, these words attracted quite a bit of criticism. Even though it couldn't be considered to be a raging storm, there were still undercurrents surging in the true Immortal Alliance. Many halls found the overbearing and domineering Floating Clouds office to be an eyesore. In the end, the storm subsided. It was said that the big shots at the top sat down and had a chat. A bald perfected monarch showed some things to the other perfected monarchs. Then, they chatted for a while and went their separate ways. Following that, Fuyunji stopped arresting people. Of course, it was also possible that they had already arrested all the people that they should have arrested. At the same time, the people from other halls also received verbal orders from their superiors. They only said that among those who were arrested, there were indeed many spies of the evil cult with conclusive evidence. Naturally, everyone did not make a ruckus anymore. However, although Fuyunji could be considered to have achieved a significant victory, they also restrained themselves a lot. Probably because they had received a secret warning, they were not as aggressive as before. In short, this period of time passed just like that. Things calmed down just like that. The power of the evil cult in Immortal City was basically uprooted. The world was at peace, the wind was calm and the waves were calm. Not to mention a storm, not even a ripple could be seen. Zhengxian Meng, this behemoth, was the leader of the world. Millions of people submitted to it. It was in line with the phrase, prosperous and flourishing. Recently, White Lotus had been following Lu Chen. No matter where Lu Chen went, she was almost always by his side. If there was something, she would do it. If there was something, she would help. If there was nothing, she would stand at the side in a daze. In short, other than not sleeping in the same room at night, she was almost inseparable from Lu Chen. At least, she was always within Lu Chen's sight and never left his side. And because of this, Lu Chen, who had recently risen to fame and was regarded by Zheng Xianmeng as the biggest heir to the huge foundation of Lord Tianlan, also left an impression in Tianlong Mountain. That was, no matter where he went, there would always be two closest subordinates by his side. One was the fatty old Ma and the other was the extraordinarily beautiful young girl White Lotus. From time to time, old Ma would leave to help Lu Chen. But the outstanding and beautiful young girl never left Lu Chen's side. She seemed to be his guard, but also like a helper who could not leave his side for a moment. Some busybodies or people with ulterior motives secretly spread that even at night, White Lotus actually slept in the same room and on the same bed with Lu Chen. They said that this young girl was actually Lu Chen's concubine and so on. There were all kinds of exaggerations, ambiguities, scoldings and innuendo, which were not pleasant to hear. Of course, these rumors could not escape the ears of Fuyunji and would naturally spread to Lu Chen and the other two. In this regard, Lu Chen could do nothing. Old Ma just laughed it off. And White Lotus, who should have been the angriest, seemed to be the calmest. She was indifferent to this kind of dirty water that was poured on her and still followed Lu Chen closely every day. Even though Lu Chen had told her several times to avoid arousing suspicion, White Lotus still insisted on it. In the end, Lu Chen also gave up persuading her with a bitter smile. There were some things that no one could not say and dared not say, but they would always have some premonitions. Looking at such a talented and outstanding-looking young girl, who should have been regarded as a treasure in the world, right now was living with fear and trepidation, it really made one sigh. But such indulgence also brought about other consequences. Other than attracting attention, every time Lu Chen met Su Qingjun recently, all he saw was a cold face and a disdainful gaze. This evening, the upstart trio of their Tianlan Supreme's faction once again walked out of that prison in Fuyunji. Perhaps it was because that kind of dirty and dark place always gave people a kind of gloomy mood. The expressions of the three of them did not look too good. After walking to one side, Old Ma sighed and said, "Still can't get an answer, what should we do?" Now that the evil sect's power in Immortal City was almost wiped out, the only unresolved hidden danger was that missing Elder Ghost. And among the evil sect's captives, the only one who had contact with Elder Ghost was Chen He. So during this period of time, they no longer paid attention to the others and only specifically questioned Chen He. But Chen He's willpower was unexpectedly strong. No matter what method Lu Chen and the rest used, they could not pry open his mouth. Even White Lotus, who had shone brilliantly in the interrogation previously, could not do it. Hearing Old Ma's words, Lu Chen did not have any reaction, but White Lotus who was beside him had already frowned, as if she was somewhat disgusted by Old Ma's words. But the truth was the truth. Even if she was unhappy, she could only endure it. She only intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Lu Chen's face, as if she was somewhat concerned about Lu Chen's meaning. Naturally, Lu Chen would not get angry or scold them. Speaking of which, the relationship between the three of them was also a little strange. Lu Chen and Old Ma were slightly better. After all, they were old friends for more than 10 years, but White Lotus and them were not like subordinates, not like friends. Even if she wanted to scold them, it did not seem to be very good. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen still waved his hand and said, "Forget it, let's go back first." They walked all the way down the mountain. The sky slowly darkened as they walked. Unknowingly, they walked to the long street of Immortal City, and saw a familiar place in front of them was surrounded by a large piece of cloth. Lu Chen's footsteps paused, and he said, "Isn't that the place where the explosion happened a few days ago? That entire restaurant was blown up. Why is it suddenly surrounded today?" White Lotus did not speak, but it was Old Ma who was well informed and he said, "Oh, that side is going to be rebuilt. These days they have been filling that big pit, and at the same time, preserving the entrance to the underground palace." As they spoke, the three of them suddenly felt something at the same time, and looked up together, only to see a cloud falling from the night sky, turning into a ray of light and directly falling behind the cloth, disappearing without a sound. Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma, and Old Ma understood, and said in a low voice, "Now the underground palace below is not allowed to enter, including our people in Fuyunji. Those who go in and out are all people from the Starry Hall." Lu Chen was startled, and he glanced over there, frowned and said, "Could it be that person just now, is it Immortal Guyu? Why does he keep running underground for no reason?" Why is he doing this every day? Chapter 482. They stopped to watch, and as they discussed in private, they took a few steps closer to the place where the curtain was. Soon, they were discovered by several guards standing there. Not long after, someone came over. The person who came did not have an overbearing attitude, and very politely told them that this place was now under the control of the Starry Hall of Zhengxianmeng, and that unrelated people were temporarily prohibited from approaching. If it caused inconvenience to everyone, please understand. In short, please take a detour first. Lu Chen and the other two naturally would not look for trouble, so they immediately agreed and walked away. However, after leaving here, old Ma was a little emotional, and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "Look at the attitude of the people from the Starry Hall, they are peaceful and polite. If it were us in Fuyunji, probably a few people would surround them, scold them fiercely, and then tell them to get lost, right?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes and scolded with a smile. "Nonsense, although we in Fuyunji do things in a domineering manner, when did we become so overbearing? Damn fatty, don't help outsiders. Besides, if this kind of words is heard by others, and then spread to Blood Warbler or that damn Baldy, you will be out of luck." Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "Well, Lord Perfected Immortal, I guess it is unlikely that you will care about such a small matter, but if Hallmaster Xue knows about it, it will indeed be a little troublesome." As he said this, he touched his head and sighed. In this world, even the truth is not allowed to be spoken now? If you want to die, do it yourself, don't drag us down. Lu Chen glanced at him with contempt, then pulled White Lotus a few steps to the side, and said with a smile, "Let's not walk with this idiot, or we will be dragged down by him sooner or later." White Lotus did not respond to him, nor did she have any other reaction. It seemed that she obediently followed Lu Chen a few steps, and her eyes flickered slightly as she looked at Lu Chen. And standing at the side, old Ma was also startled, a little surprised on his face. The surroundings suddenly became quiet, and Lu Chen suddenly came to his senses. He looked down and found that he was still holding White Lotus's wrist. He was shocked and quickly let go. White Lotus and old Ma both looked at him, and the atmosphere seemed to become awkward. Lu Chen smiled awkwardly, and after hesitating for a moment, he said to White Lotus, My mind was suddenly confused just now. I seem to remember that you are still the 10-year-old girl on the mountain in Kunlun a few years ago. I suddenly forgot, sorry." White Lotus did not seem to be angry, but looked at Lu Chen strangely, and then nodded, as if she had accepted Lu Chen's explanation. Who knew that old Ma, who was at the side, seemed to want to see the world in chaos. He stood there and snorted and said, "What are you saying? Even if she is a 10-year-old girl, you can casually hold her hand? You obviously have ulterior motives." "Hey!" Lu Chen was furious, and he kicked old Ma and shouted, "Damn fatty, you dare to slander me?" Old Ma jumped to the side and laughed heartily. "I'm just doing this because I can't bear to watch your evil deeds any longer. White Lotus, don't be afraid. If this guy dares to bully you, just tell me, I will definitely help you vent." Ouch! Before the last sentence was finished, old Ma's buttocks had already been kicked by Lu Chen, and he immediately flew out and fell on his face. Lu Chen sneered, "First, I am not that kind of disgusting person. Second, even if I am, you can't be the hero who saves the beauty." Old Ma patted his buttocks and stood up, looking unlucky, and muttered in a low voice, "This guy, after becoming a disciple of a supreme, how did his cultivation improve so quickly? I don't see him cultivating at all." White Lotus, who was at the side, was a little surprised. Looking at these two big men scolding and laughing, she did not know why, in this quiet dark street in the dead of night, she felt a little warm. She smiled for no reason. Her originally gloomy expression also became a lot more cheerful. At this moment, Lu Chen and old Ma, who had already run to the front, realized that she was still standing behind and watching. They stopped together, waved to White Lotus and said, "Hey, why aren't you walking? Follow me." White Lotus smiled sweetly. In the darkness of the night, she was like a beautiful lily blooming, causing people's hearts to palpitate. With a clear sound of agreement, she quickly followed the two men. The three figures walked along the long street, leaving behind three blurry shadows walking side by side. Behind the erected cloth curtain was the entrance to the underground palace. After the light dispersed, a figure appeared underground. It was the master of Zhengxianmeng's Star Hall, Gu Yu Supreme. After walking through that long passage, the underground city that was wrapped in a strange red light appeared in front of him. Not long ago, this was the lair of the devil sect in the Immortal City, but now it was completely occupied by Zhengxian Meng. Gu Yu Supreme squinted her eyes and looked at the strange blood moon above the dome. She pondered for a moment and then walked towards the center of the city. At this moment, in this huge underground city, it was no longer quiet like before. In many corners of the streets and alleys, there were Star Hall's disciples busy. Looking from afar, they seemed to be arranging something in some specific places, but those people's positions looked messy, and for a moment, one could not tell what they were doing. Gu Yu Supreme seemed to turn a blind eye to the many busy subordinates around him, walked along the largest and longest street, all the way to the strange half-body statue in the center of the underground city, and saw the bald True Lord sitting cross-legged in the center of the entire city, slightly frowning as he looked up at the blood moon. The blood-red moonlight shone on his body, refracted from the top of his head, like a transparent gem, looking a little strange and funny. Gu Yu Supreme walked over and sat beside True Lord Tianlan. True Lord Tianlan turned his head to look at him, then said lightly, "Why do you look so bad?" Gu Yu Supreme shrugged and said, "It's rare for you to come down, of course you don't feel anything sitting here, but I stayed here for more than 10 days, the longer this blood corrosion power shone, the more harmful it is in the end, even I couldn't stand it, so I went up to hide for a while." True Lord Tianlan frowned, then turned to look at the other Star Hall's disciples in the city. Gu Yu Supreme understood what he meant, and said, "You don't have to worry about this, they are all rotated, at most 24 hours, then they will go out." True Lord Tianlan nodded, retracted his gaze, and at the same time, glanced at the nearby houses that were far taller than ordinary human houses. His eyes were a little gloomy. After a while, True Lord Tianlan said, "I didn't expect this demon city to actually be perfectly preserved until now." Gu Yu Supreme also sighed, seemingly a little emotional, looked at those houses, and said, "Yes, who would have thought? But it doesn't matter, they are just some empty houses, as long as the demons who lived here back then don't come back." "Come back." True Lord Tianlan smiled. There was a bit of coldness in his smile, and his eyes glanced at the ground, intentionally or unintentionally. Gu Yu Supreme obviously knew some things like him. He didn't show any strange expression towards True Lord Tianlan's attitude. Instead, he stretched out his hand and patted the ground lightly. After a while, he suddenly smiled and said, "Speaking of which, those sages of our human race, they were quite ruthless to the demons, right?" Chapter 483. Ruthless. True Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "If it's not ruthless, the ones that can be seen everywhere in this vast divine continent should be those fellows who call themselves the God race. As for us humans, we're probably still living the lives of livestock?" True Lord Gu Yu looked up at the huge statue and suddenly said, "I once read a saying in the ancient books of the Starry Hall. The 4 huge god statues in the Immortal City are indomitable and as lofty as mountains, but their bellies are hollow, imprisoning the vengeful spirits of tens of millions of people who died in ancient times." True Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, "You can't take it seriously if it's not true. The books of the demon race have basically all been burnt to ashes, and not a single word has been passed down. The pitifully few things that remain are also hidden in a place that only we can see, and they were all written by our own people." True Lord Gu Yu didn't seem angry, and seemed to agree with True Lord Tianlan's words. She smiled and nodded. True Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment, and a trace of solemnity appeared on his face. He asked True Lord Gu Yu, "Now that the blood moon has appeared, and the ethereal palace is shaken, although there are still restrictions down there won't be any accidents, right?" True Lord Gu Yu frowned slightly, and seriously pondered for a moment, as if going through all the possibilities she knew. Then she also very seriously said to True Lord Tianlan, "No, as long as the restrictions at the exit of the ethereal palace don't move, there will definitely be no accidents. Moreover, the sages of the past also have a backup plan. Even if the formation at the exit of the ethereal palace is shaken, there's another more powerful restriction that can suppress all the demons and monsters." True Lord Tianlan raised his brows and said, "There's actually such a thing, and I actually didn't know about it." True Lord Gu Yu smiled and said, "It's been too long, and most people have forgotten about these things. Only my Starry Hall has passed down this restriction method since ancient times. It can be considered as a mission passed down by the ancestors, and I have always kept it in my heart, not daring to forget it." True Lord Tianlan's face revealed an extremely rare expression of respect. He tidied his clothes, and slightly nodded towards True Lord Guyu, as if it was a respectful greeting. The usually easygoing Guyu True Monarch did not avoid it this time. She accepted the True Monarch's bow and said softly, "On behalf of the ancestors and sages, I accept your bow." Perfected Lord Tianlong nodded. "What's the second restriction formation? Can you tell me about it?" True Monarch Guyu said, "I naturally trust you. I won't hide it from you, but the biggest backup plan is actually our human race's ancestor, the sage, relying on the Xiaofan immortal city, and using the 4 divine beast statues built by the demon race as the formation core, he set up an unprecedented huge formation. Normally, this formation is concealed and can't be seen, but it can suppress the earth veins and gather spiritual energy. That's why our immortal city is known as the #1 spiritual mountain in the world." Perfected Lord Tianlong took a deep breath of air and said emotionally, "So that's the reason behind it." After a pause he said in a low voice, "But as far as I know, this outer formation has probably never really been used after it was completed, right?" Perfected Lord Guyu smiled. This formation was originally meant to suppress the ethereal palace just in case, but all the unusual movements of the ethereal palace previously could not even shake the first restriction beneath our feet, so why would it need to be used? Perfected Lord Tianlong also smiled. After a while, he raised his head and looked at the source of the red moonlight above his head. He seemed to be deep in thought, then casually asked Perfected Lord Guyu, "Even when the blood moon is in the sky and the bloodlight is at its brightest, is it still fine? You must know that at that time, the magic power and cultivation of us human cultivators are all suppressed. It's considered the weakest time." "Of course it's fine," Perfected Lord Guyu said without hesitation. "I don't know how many times I've seen that formation. Its power is unimaginable. Suppressing the demon race is nothing difficult." Perfected Lord Tianlong clapped his hands and laughed heartily. His smile was carefree, as if he was finally relieved. Some time ago in the Immortal City, Zhengxianmeng and Fuyunji's attack against the demonic sect could be said to have shaken the entire city, especially the seizure of the demonic sect's underground lair. It could be considered as the greatest victory since the Battle of the Desolate Valley more than 10 years ago. After that, Fuyunji pursued after the victory, using the captured captives to interrogate the remaining members of the demonic sect. They carried out another round of arrests and wiped out the demons of the demonic sect that were entrenched in the dark corners of the Immortal City. The world was bright, the righteous path was prosperous. The reputation of Fuyunji reached its peak in history at this time of the year. Probably the only thing that's not perfect is that we didn't catch that elder ghost. Walking on Tianlong Mountain, Old Ma said to Lu Chen and White Lotus with some emotion, "If we really caught that old tortoise, we might really be able to completely uproot the demonic sect. Then we can be considered to have completed the great cause that many generations of heroes have not been able to do. It's enough to leave our names in history." Lu Chen smiled. White Lotus, who was beside him, took a look at him and said with some surprise, "You actually still want to leave your name in history?" "Hey." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said seriously, "What's with that expression of yours? What do you mean I still want to leave my name in history? Let me tell you too, as long as it's a human, they all have the heart of fame and wealth. It's just a matter of how big or small it is. No matter what, I'm also an old man who has been fighting with the demonic sect for decades. If I really defeat these evildoers, it's not too much for me to ask for a name in the future generation, right?" Lu Chen smiled and did not speak, and White Lotus for the past few days, for some reason, her mood suddenly improved a lot. Although she was still cold to outsiders, but towards Lu Chen and Old Ma, she was much closer. Hearing that, she smiled and said, "But in the world of righteous path, who knows how many people are fighting with the demonic sect? Why do you say that others only remember you?" Old Ma was speechless for a moment. After a long silence, he revealed a bitter expression and said, "Then what can we do? There are indeed countless righteous people in this world. We don't have any benefits. Don't tell me we can't even have a name?" White Lotus glanced at the person next to her, then pointed to Lu Chen and said, "No, in the future he will be immortalized. This Lu Chen or Tianing name is destined to be praised by many people in the future." Lu Chen was startled, his smile slightly disappeared. Old Ma was somewhat unconvinced and said, "On what basis?" White Lotus shrugged and said, "On the basis that he is the disciple of Huashan Jinjuan, on the basis that his natural position is higher than yours, on the basis that he now ascends to the sky in one step and holds great power. In the future everyone may say that the reason why we can defeat the demonic sect is all because of Tianlong Zhenjuan and Lu Chen master and disciple pair of diligent efforts, risking their lives to achieve it." Old Ma was speechless. After a long while he murmured, This difference is too big, just because his reputation is greater than mine? Isn't it enough that his reputation is greater than yours? White Lotus sneered and said, You are the same as me, just an ordinary person among the masses, always just a shadow following behind him. You have nothing, no identity, no status, no achievements, or, even if you have achievements no one knows, then on what basis do you still have delusions of wanting to be immortalized? Enough! A shout came from the mouth of Lu Chen, his face a little dark, looking at White Lotus with a frown and said, We were just having a good conversation, why did we suddenly talk about this irrelevant topic? As long as we don't find that Elder Gue, the demonic sect will always be in danger of resurrection. How can we have so many thoughts of being immortalized? Let's quickly go ask that Chen He again. With that said, he strode towards the prison that had already appeared in front of them. Behind him, Old Ma sighed, waved to White Lotus, and then followed. White Lotus pursed her lips, her eyes fell on the back of Lu Chen. After a moment, she snorted and slowly walked over, at the same time muttering in a low voice. It's just a guilty conscience. I don't believe you can catch that old turtle. If you really catch him, how many people in Fuyunji will? Chapter 484. Out of the three of them, only Lu Chen and White Lotus entered Fuyunji's prison. As for Old Ma, for the past few days, he followed them to this place to casually stroll around and then left by himself. As for where he was going, he never told Lu Chen and White Lotus, and Lu Chen also did not ask him, as if he already knew. Currently, the number of evil sect demon captives imprisoned in this prison was already quite a lot, but to Lu Chen and White Lotus, most of them basically had no value to interrogate. The only thing they were interested in was the news of that missing ghost elder, and the only person who could provide a statement here was only one person, that was Chen He. Chen He's days were very miserable, and also very bitter. The Fuyunci and the devil cult had been fighting for so many years, so naturally, they also had many sinister and ruthless methods in the dark. And the fairy-like young lady from a few days ago was also a formidable character. She was so young and incomparably savage, torturing him until he hovered between life and death. Just that for some reason, he still did not speak and kept silent. However, in the past few days, he also noticed that those who came to interrogate him were usually those 2 or 3 people. The strange thing was, the one who used his mouth to interrogate him was always that little girl, and the other man always stood at the side without saying a word, from the beginning to the end, looking at him but never said a word. Who was that person? He was tortured until he was a little delirious. Sometimes his mind was blank, sometimes he felt that the man seemed somewhat familiar, but sometimes he also felt that he was very strange. Chen He had already lost all hope towards his own fate. He even started to become numb from the day after day of torture, woodenly waiting for the arrival of the day of death in pain. Just that today, he was like a dog being dragged out of the prison by those fiendish prison guards. He thought it would be another day of unbearable pain, but very quickly, he discovered that today seemed to be somewhat different. The path he took today was different from usual. That disgusting and frightening interrogation room appeared in his sight as usual. But those guards still dragged Chen He, who was already riddled with scars, still wearing heavy shackles and could not even walk on his own, and continued to walk forward. After walking past the interrogation room, they walked forward for a while and came to another room. They opened the door and then threw Chen He in. Pam! Chen He fell heavily on the ground. Those Fuyunji guards never had any sympathy for these evil sect demons, and then with another muffled sound, they closed the door. The room seemed to be very quiet, and did not seem to have the usual blood stench and stench of this prison. Chen He panted heavily, gritting his teeth as he struggled to prop his body up, and looked around. This seemed to be a quiet room, but the room was empty. There were no furnishings, including the 4 walls. There were only 2 people standing in front of him. Chen He opened his eyes wide, and after a moment, saw the 2 familiar faces, and could not help but smile bitterly. It was Lu Chen and White Lotus. They stood in this empty room, but at the same time, there were no disgusting and frightening torture tools and blood. White Lotus's expression looked a little strange, and on this day, it was Lu Chen who stood in front, and she quietly stood behind. Chen He fell back to the ground, quietly lying on the flat floor. For a moment, he actually felt a trace of happiness. Since when did a moment of peace and tranquility, without the stench of blood, and without pain and punishment become an extravagant hope? Footsteps sounded, and after a moment, a pair of feet appeared beside his head. Chen He struggled to turn his head, and saw Lu Chen's face. Lu Chen squatted down beside him, looked at Chen He and said, "Do you recognize me?" Chen He looked at him in a daze, and then shook his head. Lu Chen thought for a moment, and then glanced at his almost unscathed body, and then sighed and said, "Almost 20 years. You are the toughest evil sect person I have ever seen." Chen He did not know how to react, and thought, could this sentence be a compliment, or was it full of malicious mockery, or in the following time, they would use even more vicious torture methods to torture people? Lu Chen took a box from his side, placed it by his feet, and then took out a small stool from somewhere, sat beside Chen He who was lying on the ground, and said indifferently, "The shackles cannot be removed, the other parts of your body will hurt, bear with it." Chen He did not understand the meaning of this sentence, and was stunned. Suddenly, he heard a crisp sound, and a piercing pain came from his chest. Chen He instinctively howled, and his body trembled uncontrollably. In Lu Chen's hand was a piece of tattered cloth, and it was a piece of Chen He's clothes on his chest. After many days of torture, his flesh was badly mutilated, and these clothes had already stuck together with his flesh. He directly tore it off, and immediately the wound on Chen He's chest was torn open, and blood flowed out. Chen He groaned in pain, but Lu Chen remained indifferent. He only frowned slightly as he looked at Chen He's chest. Under the incomparably filthy black prisoner's uniform, the flesh on this prisoner's chest had already turned black and rotted. Lu Chen shook his head. With an indifferent expression, he stretched out his hand again and tore at the air repeatedly with a swish. Chen He suddenly screamed, and his hoarse voice reverberated in the quiet room. It was even more mournful than the sound of a pig being slaughtered. White Lotus, who was standing at the side, frowned, and looked at Lu Chen with a complicated expression. This continued for a while, and Lu Chen had already torn off all of Chen He's clothes, including his pants. It was only because White Lotus was a girl that he still left him a pair of underwear. But looking at it now, Chen He's wretched state could be seen. It was truly a body with cuts and bruises all over, and it could be seen that he had recently been severely tortured. Lu Chen threw away the tattered cloth in his hand, and then opened the box by his feet. After a moment, he carried a jar over, and casually opened the stopper. A strong smell of alcohol floated out. "This is an extremely strong liquor. Do you want to drink it?" Lu Chen asked Chen He. Chen He was still panting, and at the same time he looked at Lu Chen, but there was no fear in his eyes. He grinned and said in a hoarse voice, "Drink." Lu Chen smiled, and with a flick of his wrist, a white liquid poured out. Chen He immediately opened his mouth wide, greedily catching this rare liquor, and swallowed it in big mouthfuls. In the quiet room, the sound of gurgling could be heard incessantly. When he didn't have time to drink, the strong alcohol splashed from his mouth and landed on the wounds on his body. The pain made Chen He spasm and tremble. This was about 30% of the wine in the jar. Lu Chen stopped. Chen He gulped down the last mouthful of strong liquor, panting as if he had not had enough. He let out a long sigh and said, "That was satisfying." Lu Chen said lightly, "A lot of the rotten flesh on your body needs to be cut off, or else you won't live. Just treat this liquor as a rinse. If you can bear it, then bear it. If you can't, then faint." Chen He was startled, and before he could speak, he saw Lu Chen pour the jar of liquor on his chest. The burning pain immediately made Chen He scream. However, from the corner of his eye, he saw a black dagger in Lu Chen's hand. The dagger pierced his chest, and with a flick of his wrist, a piece of black rotten flesh was cut off. Blood splattered, and Chen He's scream seemed to shake the entire prison. But halfway through his scream, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Chapter 485. Fainting in severe pain is said to be a self-protective response of the human body, but sometimes a more intense or more prolonged pain can cause a person to wake up from a coma. That was what happened to Chen He that day. After a low growl, his originally unconscious body trembled and woke up again. Then, his face was distorted, and he was sweating profusely. However, he did not panic. He had already experienced the same intense pain during this period of time in the terrifying interrogation room. Of course, this did not mean that he would feel better after experiencing it. On the contrary, this kind of pain could easily make people wish they were dead. Despite the intense pain, Chen He could still see that the wounds on his body, chest, and abdomen had been bandaged with a clean white cloth. At the same time, the wounds under the white cloth were still painful, but they were much less painful. There was even a cool feeling coming from the wounds. This was clearly a sign that healing medicine had been applied on the wounds. However, there was still intense pain coming from his body. That was because Lu Chen hadn't pulled back yet. He was still holding onto Chen He's right arm, calmly treating the wound. Chen He endured the pain and looked at him. He found that Lu Chen's treatment method was abnormally rough and direct. He first checked the skin wounds, and if there was any rotten and smelly flesh, he would directly cut it with a black dagger. If the injury was slightly lighter, such as the skin being torn open, he would directly pour liquor on it and rinse it. These two methods were enough to make people wish they were dead. Even a tough person like Chen He could not stop screaming and gasping for breath. His head was covered in cold sweat, and his body was trembling. Not long after, Lu Chen finished treating the wounds on his right arm. Then, he took out some ointment from the box beside him and applied it to the wound. Then, he took out a clean white cloth and bandaged it. Soon, the terrifying pain subsided a lot, and a cool feeling came from the wound. Why? Chen He looked at Lu Chen and asked in a low voice, as if he had finally managed to take a breather from the effective but excruciating healing. Lu Chen looked at him, then walked to the other side of his body with the tools in his hand and sat down. He picked up Chen He's left arm and examined it. At the same time he said faintly, "You are a person who is useful to me, but if you continue to be tortured like this, even if you don't die, you will go crazy." Chen He was silent. Everyone's body and will had a limit. Once the last line was crossed, people would die, or if they were pushed too far, they would go crazy. Chen He was very determined to keep the secret, but he really felt that he could not hold on any longer. No one could continue to endure such intense pain for a long time. Hiss! Suddenly, Chen He let out a low groan and sucked in a breath of cold air. It was Lu Chen who had sliced off a piece of rotten flesh from his arm. Fresh blood gushed out. Chen He's face was as white as paper and he almost fainted again. He clenched his teeth and looked at Lu Chen calmly treating the wound. Suddenly, a few words came out from between his teeth. "Thank you." Lu Chen looked up at him and said, "What are you thanking me for? Maybe I will make you suffer even more in the future." Chen He sneered, panting as he leaned his head on the ground and said, "Just come." Lu Chen smiled. Seeing that the wound was almost treated, he took out the medicine and started to apply it. After a while, Chen He suddenly asked, "Should I know you?" This time, Lu Chen did not raise his head. He calmly said, "More or less. I am called Lu Chen. I used to stay in the evil faction. If you have stayed in the sect long enough and your position is high enough, you will probably know my other name." "What name?" Chen He frowned and asked. "Black Wolf." "Black Wolf." Chen He repeated the name twice. Suddenly, his face changed. Then, the way he looked at Lu Chen was completely different. He stared at Lu Chen and said in a hoarse voice, "It's that barren valley." "Yes, I did it." Lu Chen said cleanly. "Ah!" Chen He let out a beast-like roar. Suddenly, his body rose up, as if he was about to burst out with unimaginable power and pounce towards Lu Chen. But before he could raise his arm that was wrapped in white cloth, Lu Chen's palm had already slapped him on the cheek. Pa! A crisp and heavy slap directly slapped Chen He to the ground. A line of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His whole body was pressed against the ground, gasping for breath. However, the pain did not end. Without waiting for him to take another breath, suddenly, a heart-wrenching pain came from his thigh, causing Chen He to scream miserably, as if he had used all his strength to shout. White Lotus, who was standing at the side, frowned. She watched as Lu Chen stepped on the wound on Chen He's thigh with a deadpan expression. At the same time, he kept twisting and rubbing, causing Chen He's whole body to tremble. He looked like a mad dog. She then looked at the bandaged wounds on Chen He's upper body, and then looked at Lu Chen's completely different behavior from before. She couldn't help but think, is this guy a lunatic in his heart? After Chen He screamed for a while, Lu Chen moved his foot away from his wound and then squatted down in front of him. Looking at Chen He's face covered in cold sweat, his distorted and trembling face, he said calmly, "Do you know your situation now?" Chen He gasped, then looked up at him, nodded, and even gritted his teeth and smiled. Although the smile was uglier than crying, he said, "I understand." Lu Chen stared at him for a moment, then nodded and said, "You are a smart person." Lu Chen turned around and acted as if nothing had happened. As if nothing had happened, he began to help Chen He treat the wounds on his legs. But after being trampled by his vicious foot, the wound on Chen He's thigh was at least half as serious, causing Chen He to suffer a lot more. In the process of treating him, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Recently, when I watched you being tortured, I often thought of one thing. If I had exposed my identity in the devil cult, I would probably have suffered the same fate as you. At that time, would I be able to endure the pain like you?" As he spoke, the blade in his hand did not stop. Chen He was in so much pain that he was sweating and seeing stars, but he couldn't even answer. Fortunately, Lu Chen didn't seem to care about his answer. After a moment of silence, he seemed to be talking to himself. "Later I understood, I can endure it." Although he was in extreme pain, Chen He still glanced at him with some contempt, probably because he didn't believe Lu Chen's words. Lu Chen didn't explain anything to him. He just calmly did his own thing and then said calmly, "So I asked myself, why do I feel that I can endure it?" After he said this, not only Chen He, but even White Lotus also looked over. Lu Chen smiled and continued to say arrogantly, "Later I understood because at that time, I really believed in something, and firmly believed in it, even at the risk of my life. So I am not afraid of death, nor am I afraid of pain. No matter how much pain I can endure it." An ordinary person wouldn't be able to endure such intense pain. Those who are able to endure it and remain clear-headed must have some kind of belief in their hearts that supports them, making them unwavering. If they aren't even afraid of death, why would they be afraid of pain? Am I right? Lu Chen looked at Chen He and said lightly, "So, I'm very curious, what exactly is in your heart that makes you so stubbornly endure until now, and would rather die than betray Elder Gue? Is it that old tortoise who has done you a great favor? Or do you have something on you, like a relative being held hostage? Or, you firmly believe in the legend of the devil cult, and think that the three realms will be unified sooner or later, and the devil cult will be the final home of the human race, right?" Lu Chen smiled and said to Chen He, "Which one is it? Can you tell me about it?" Chapter 486. Chen He did not say a single word to Lu Chen. In fact, after Lu Chen said those harsh words to him, although his face changed and his expression was complicated, he did not say a word, even his eyes were closed, like a living dead lying on the ground motionless. No matter how Lu Chen tormented him, there was no reaction. However, Lu Chen didn't seem to be angry. He still used the original method to deal with the wounds on Chen He's body with the kind of rough method that made people's teeth hurt. After bandaging, after everything was done, he stood up, clapped his hands and said, "Today you will stay here first. Don't go back to the prison. I will come again tomorrow. I hope you will tell me the truth then." After speaking, he called out to White Lotus and then the two of them left the quiet room. When the door was closed, White Lotus glanced at Chen He who was lying on the ground, found that the prisoner's body was mostly wrapped in white cloth, looking very comical. At this moment, he was still lying on the ground motionless, as if he was indifferent to any movement in the outside world, a little like he had isolated himself. "Why are you so polite to this evil sect demon?" After walking out of the Fuyunji prison, White Lotus couldn't help but ask Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at her strangely, said, "Do you have enmity with the evil sect? You look like you can't wait to torture them to death." White Lotus shook her head, said, "There is no enmity, even what I did a few days ago." She shook her head, her face was a little sad but she did not continue, only said, "But don't the whole world think that they are crazy demons who stir up trouble? Why do you have to be so polite to them and even treat their injuries? Wouldn't it be better to directly torture them?" "The problem is, any kind of torture seems to be useless against this person now." Lu Chen said, "These days you have been following me and even did it yourself. I don't need to say this, right?" White Lotus was speechless. What Lu Chen said was naturally right, to be honest, although because of the secret method she cultivated, sometimes her heart was more ruthless, but it was really the first time she saw someone like Chen He who could withstand such torture. "If it was you, do you think you can survive this period of time?" Lu Chen asked her in return. White Lotus was silent. After a while she shook her head, said in a low voice, "No." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's right. Since punishment is useless, let's try something else. Humans, no matter how tough and toughy gang is, the body will always like comfort. When it is comfortable, the spirit will be relaxed. We will wait until he relaxes, maybe there will be a chance." White Lotus frowned, said, "Why so many twists and turns? Can it really work?" Lu Chen said with a smile, "Anyway, we can't ask now, right? Let's give it a try. At worst, I will let you beat him back to his original state later." White Lotus took a few steps forward, suddenly looked back at Lu Chen. A strange light flashed in her eyes. Lu Chen said, "What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like this?" White Lotus hesitated for a moment, but still shook her head and said, "Nothing." The two walked to the front of the Kunlun Hall. Lu Chen went over to ask, and learned from the respectful guard at the door that Supreme Tianlan went out early in the morning, and had not returned yet. Lu Chen walked back and said to White Lotus, "I have something to talk to Death Ray. My master, now I am waiting for him here, but I don't know when he will come back. You don't have to accompany me here, or go home and rest first." White Lotus was obviously stunned for a moment, then said, "Oh," nodded to him, turned around and walked away. Lu Chen watched her walk away, then turned around to greet the guards at the door of the hall, and said with a smile, "I will wait in the hall." The guards all agreed with a smile. The identity of the person in front of them had now been announced to the world. He was the most favored disciple of Supreme Tianlan, and according to Supreme Tianlan's recent performance, there was a great possibility that this huge foundation would be handed over to him in the future. As the palace guards of a deity transformation stage perfected cultivator, it was natural for them to be highly skilled and loyal. With their status, they could be rude to most of the people in the Alliance of True Immortals, including some powerful nascent soul-perfected cultivators. However, when it came to this young master, the guards were all smiles and hurriedly sent him in without the slightest intention of stopping him. However, when Lu Chen's one foot had just crossed the threshold, suddenly a call came from behind. He looked back and was startled for a moment. It was White Lotus who had returned, and was standing on the stone steps of the Kunlun Hall. Lu Chen walked over, a little puzzled, and asked, "What's wrong? Is there anything else?" White Lotus's expression was complicated, and she said in a low voice, "I'm not tired, and I'm not in a hurry, and it's almost dark. I'll wait for you here, and when you're done, we can go back together." Lu Chen stared at her for a while, then nodded and said, "If that's the case, wait for me here for a while." "Okay." White Lotus replied, and then really sat down on the white stone steps. Lu Chen entered the main hall of Kunlun and looked around. He had come to this place many times, and every time he came, he felt that it was empty, especially this time when he was alone. There was a particularly cold and lonely feeling. That damn Baldy must have sat alone in this huge hall many times in the past. I wonder what his mood is like, and if he also feels a little lonely. Thinking of this, Lu Chen quickly shook his head and laughed, thinking, that damn Baldy is not a normal person. The thoughts and feelings that ordinary people have must not make sense to him. The tall lotus throne in the hall sat there conspicuously, and below it was a chair. Lu Chen went over and sat down casually, and then quietly waited. This wait went on for a long time, and he did not know where Supreme Tianlan had gone, and did not come back. But the sky outside finally gradually darkened, and dark clouds gathered in the sky. Dusk was approaching, and there seemed to be a storm in the sky. Lu Chen did not seem to have any reaction to the change of the weather outside, and still quietly sat and waited. Finally, after the sky outside darkened, when the first thunder sounded, a tall figure appeared at the door and walked in. The guards at the door of the main hall seemed to have received an order, and one after another, they all retreated. After a while, the figure of Supreme Tianlan appeared in front of Lu Chen, looked at him with a trace of a smile, and very calmly said, "I heard that you have something to talk to me about?" "Yes." Lu Chen stood up, and did not say too much nonsense, and very directly said, "It's about the matter of pursuing the evil sect Elder Ghost. Among all the evil sect demons that have been caught, only one called Chen he knows about Elder Ghost, but this person is very stubborn, even punishment cannot make him yield, so I think—" Boom! A flash of lightning suddenly flashed, a sound of thunder exploded in the sky, suddenly interrupting Lu Chen's words, and then there was only the sound of water splashing, and it was raining heavily outside. In the darkness of the night, candles had not been lit in time in the main hall, and it seemed a little dark, and probably because Supreme Tianlan had given the order beforehand, so those servants did not come to light the fire. The master and disciple stood facing each other in the darkness. Lu Chen was just about to continue when he suddenly saw Supreme Tianlan suddenly raise his hand, and stopped him, and at the same time turned his head to look at the main hall's entrance. Lu Chen followed his gaze, and his brows also slowly furrowed. Outside the empty main hall, amidst the sudden gale and bitter rain, there was a lonely and frail figure sitting on the stone steps when a flash of lightning occasionally illuminated the front of the hall. The figure curled up motionlessly, allowing the wind and rain to batter the figure, drenching his clothes and hair. He looked lonely and extremely pitiful. Supreme Tianlan turned around, and looked at Lu Chen again. A trace of a bitter smile appeared on Lu Chen's face, and he sighed. Just when he was about to say something, he suddenly saw the cold expression on Supreme Tianlan's face, with some coldness as he said, "This girl is pretending to be crazy, deliberately sitting there in the rain and wind, pretending to be pitiful for you to see, nothing more than to make you soft-hearted and protect yourself. At such a young age, her heart is detestable, she deserves to die." Boom! Another clap of thunder sounded in the sky. Lu Chen's expression was indifferent, only his pair of eyes violently contracted. Chapter 487. Lightning tore through the dark sky and split the night sky in half like a huge lightsaber in the storm. It also illuminated the dark world at that moment. Lu Chen raised his head and looked at the person in front of him. Perfected Lord Tianlan stood in the dark hall. He was tall and burly and had a cold and angry expression on his face. He looked like a glaring Vajra and a demonic god, instilling fear in people. For so many years, he had always been high and mighty like a god, looking down on all living beings and holding the lives and hopes of countless people in his hands. His eyes were as deep as the ocean and his gaze fluctuated like turbulent waves. He was also staring at Lu Chen. In this magnificent hall, there was a short period of time when it suddenly became quiet and no one spoke. The figure on the stone steps outside the hall was still sitting in the wind and rain, enduring the harsh wind and rain. "Is there a need to do this? She's just a child," Lu Chen said in a low voice. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and said, "You were also a child when you entered the devil cult. What did you do later?" Lu Chen's expression changed and he said, "She's still young and can't be compared to me. Back then I was taught by you. She won't be so ruthless." "Who was the one who repeatedly tortured the captive of the devil cult these few days?" Perfected Lord Tianlan interrupted him and said with some mockery, "That method is much stronger than when you were at this age, right?" "She hates me and you." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen and said calmly, "Go and kill her." "Me? Why? You can't do it?" "But she's a disciple of Kunlun after all. Moreover, she's a rare 5-pillar talent. I can't." "She's Bai Chen's last disciple." Perfected Lord Tianlan interrupted him. Lu Chen immediately stopped talking. After a while he sighed and said, "At the end of the day, this is the reason why she should die." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with a deep gaze. "Is this reason enough?" Lu Chen fell silent. After a while he said in a low voice, "Enough. Why must I kill her myself?" The moment Lu Chen stepped out of the main hall of Kunlun, his conversation with Perfected Lord Tianlan was still echoing in his mind. Even at that moment, even if he did not turn around, he could still feel the pair of cold eyes staring at his back. "You are my successor. If you don't do this, who will?" He knew that Baldy had always been paranoid. He knew that Baldy loved to play with people's hearts. He knew that this person was probably the most terrifying madman in the world. He also knew that, based on past experience, Baldy had almost never been wrong. A madman who almost never makes a mistake. "Pa!" Lu Chen walked out of the eaves of the main hall and into the storm. His feet stepped into a puddle on the ground. Sparkling water droplets flew into the air and transformed into a strange glow in the air. The girl sitting on the steps trembled slightly as if she had sensed something. However, she did not turn around. She hugged her body tightly as if a bone-chilling cold was piercing through her body. She looked delicate and pitiful, like a delicate spring flower about to wither in the wind and rain. In the blink of an eye, the wind and rain had drenched Lu Chen's body, but he did not seem to feel it at all. In the dark hall behind him, there was a tall and burly figure standing by the door, looking at his back indifferently. His figure seemed to have merged with the night, turning into the omnipresent night sky that surrounded the two people in the wind and rain. Lu Chen walked over step by step. At some point, a black dagger had appeared in his right hand. Every step he took was accompanied by wind, rain, and splashes of water. In the pouring rain, a strange power seemed to be slowly rising in the dark night, forcing the curtain of water aside and opening up a path that led straight to that weak and helpless figure. White Lotus finally stood up and slowly turned around. She looked at the expressionless Lu Chen walking over, and also saw the black dagger in his hand. Her face was covered with rainwater droplets. She looked somewhat miserable and haggard, as if she had finally fallen into despair. Then in a helpless voice she said to Lu Chen, "Why? Did I not do well enough? Lu Chen stopped in front of her and looked into her eyes. After a while he said, sometimes in this world, there are those unreasonable things that happen. White Lotus sorrowfully looked at him and mournfully said, but I still want to live. Lu Chen said, but he wants you to die. White Lotus stared at him, as if using all her heart and hope, and said in a low voice, save me, can you? Lu Chen's gaze seemed to dim for a moment, as if thinking of something from the past, or perhaps feeling something. But after a moment he still opened his mouth and said, I can't save you. He raised his hand, holding the dagger, and then stabbed out. The black dagger pierced through the curtain of rain and water. At that moment, the world seemed to suddenly slow down, and perfectly round water droplets shot out in all directions. White Lotus's despairing and terrified gaze, the cold rain falling on her face like flying teardrops, and behind Lu Chen, countless black shadows suddenly appeared, like ghosts suddenly appearing in the darkness, wildly shouting. There was also a bolt of lightning that suddenly struck down from the sky. In the depths of the wind and rain, there was a tall and dark figure. He stared at her from afar. Just that gaze made White Lotus not dare to breathe, not dare to resist. She could only subconsciously reach out with her hands and grab the dagger, but she was powerless to stop it. She could only watch as the dagger pierced towards her chest. Lu Chen understood White Lotus. He knew that this young girl looked pure and innocent, but in reality, she had a viciousness and strength that could not be underestimated. But in the next moment, he was shocked. White Lotus's almost powerless reaction caught him off guard. That dagger pierced straight into her chest. The wind and rain soaked the young girl's clothes, and drops of water fell from her cheeks. Her hands grabbed the black dagger, and then dark red blood flowed from her palms, slowly dripping down along the blade. The black dagger pierced through her clothes and into her chest. Enough! Suddenly, a voice came from the hall, like a clap of thunder echoing in the dark night. Lu Chen's expression changed. With a low groan, he lowered his wrist and bent his body. With a light shout, the dagger was pulled back with a spray of blood. White Lotus's body was on the verge of collapse. Lu Chen hugged her, and suddenly looked back, only to see that in the distant hall, the tall and sturdy figure had already turned around. He seemed to casually wave his hand, and as he walked, he said, spare her life. Before he finished speaking, his figure had already disappeared into the darkness. There was no reason, no explanation. Lu Chen stared blankly in that direction, and suddenly lowered his head, only to see that White Lotus's chest already had a wound, and blood was gushing out. The young girl's face was as pale as paper, and she was already unconscious. He roared angrily, and with a wave of his hand, the black dagger disappeared in an instant. When his hand reached out from his bosom, there was already a jade bottle. With a crack, Lu Chen directly crushed the bottle with the red plum pattern, and then stuffed an elixir into White Lotus's mouth. Then, he carried White Lotus and rushed down the mountain. In the wind and rain, the great hall stood majestically. On the lotus throne, true Lord Tianlan sat like a demon god, his expression solemn as he gazed into the distance. After an unknown period of time, he slowly nodded, a trace of satisfaction on his face. Chapter 488. Boom! Another clap of thunder exploded in the sky. There was no one in front of or behind the great hall. There was only the seemingly endless wind and rain beating against their faces, and further away, there seemed to be a boundless sea of darkness. Lu Chen followed the mountain path down the mountain, but just as he passed the Fuyunji Great Hall ahead, he suddenly stopped, looked down at White Lotus in his arms. Under the lightning that flashed across the sky, the ice-cold raindrops slapped against White Lotus's face, making her face pale like paper, without the slightest trace of blood. However, amidst this miserable wind and bitter rain, the young girl seemed to have suddenly lost all pretense. She didn't have that elegant and otherworldly temperament, nor did she have that vicious and ruthless appearance. She was like a weak little beast that only had pain and fear left, curling up and nestling in Lu Chen's embrace. White Lotus's clothes on her chest, there was still blood gushing out incessantly, as if it could not be stopped. Lu Chen frowned as he swept the surroundings with his gaze, and then he suddenly turned around and flashed towards another direction. Not long after, that familiar row of houses appeared in his field of vision, silently standing in the raging storm. Lu Chen carried by Lien and sprinted away, sweeping across the long street in the heavy rain. When he arrived in front of one of the houses, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and stopped his body. The remaining force of his footsteps suddenly splashed water on the flagstone road like a waterfall, splashing into the air. And Lu Chen did not have the slightest hesitation, exerting force with his feet. His entire body soared into the air, carrying White Lotus over that high wall, flying into that house, landing in front of the bedroom door. As soon as his feet touched the ground, water splashed everywhere, but his surroundings suddenly became quiet. Perhaps it was because the 4 towering walls blocked the outside world, or perhaps it was because a chilling aura suddenly filled the air. Lu Chen did not have the slightest hesitation, directly pushed the door, just that at this moment, in that already dark bedroom, suddenly a light low shout, that door abruptly opened, the miserable wind and rain outside the house instantly rushed into the darkness, but the next moment, together with that darkness, all of the rain and wind in an instant were all swept back. A blazing bright and dazzling sword light emerged from the darkness like a bolt of lightning. It was peerlessly swift and fierce, and it carried the momentum of a storm as it pierced towards Lu Chen from the darkness. Lu Chen took a step back, did not retaliate, did not evade, only whispered urgently, "It's me!" The sword light shone brightly, breaking through the air, as if to cut through everything, as if to kill all enemies. Lu Chen's pupils shrank, but he still stood where he was. In a flash, that sword light had already arrived. And then, abruptly stopped. The light slowly dispersed, a long sword stretched out from that house, the body of the sword as bright as autumn water, the incomparably sharp sword tip, pointing right at the space between Lu Chen's eyebrows. Inside and outside the house, the sound of the wind and rain, the cold wind blew past. It was as silent as before. Thunder rumbled in the sky, lightning flashed, illuminating the dark night for a moment, saw the girl standing behind the door, holding the sword, cold and beautiful, just like the day they first met. In a trance, it seemed that many years had passed. So imprinted in his heart, he had not forgotten. The two of them looked at each other. They could clearly see Su Qingjun standing behind the door, her surprised eyes and the complicated emotions that followed. After a while, she still slowly put down the sword in her hand, a little surprised said, "Why is it you?" Lu Chen did not have time to reminisce with her at this moment, suddenly took a step forward, and said in a deep voice, "It's urgent, help me, save someone." Only then did Su Qingjun notice that he was carrying White Lotus in his arms, and that his breathing was obviously not right, as well as the wound on his chest that was dyed red with blood. Immediately her expression changed, and she cried out involuntarily, "White Lotus? How did she suffer such a serious injury?" Lu Chen took a deep breath, pushed White Lotus into her arms, and said, "She is an unmarried girl, and the wound is in a private place. It is really not good for me to treat her, otherwise it would be sullying her innocence. The matter is urgent. The only girl I know on this mountain top is you. Can you help me?" Su Qingjuan's eyes lit up for no reason, looked at Lu Chen, hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "White Lotus, she is also a disciple of our Kunlun. Of course I should save her, you leave it to me." As she spoke, she stretched out her hand to take the White Lotus. Who knew that when she was holding White Lotus, there was a pause in the middle. Both of them were startled, looked down, and found that the already unconscious White Lotus at some point had one hand tightly grasped the collar of Lu Chen's chest, tightly not letting go, like a drowning person grasping the last life-saving straw, putting all her hope on it. Su Qingjun slightly frowned. Lu Chen immediately stretched out his hand, carefully pried off White Lotus's fingers one by one, and then sent her over. Su Qingjun nodded to him, turned around, and was about to enter the house, but was stopped by Lu Chen. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun asked with some puzzlement. Lu Chen took out a small bag from his bosom, stuffed it into Su Qingjuan's hand, and said, "There is a kind of poison on her wound. It will make the blood flow non-stop, and it will not heal. You can apply the powder in this to her wound. It will stop the bleeding." Su Qingjun was a little surprised, but still took the small bag, then turned around and walked into the house. Lu Chen stood in the same place for a moment, then reached out to close the door, stood at the door, turned around, looked up at the dark sky, and looked at the wind and rain, then let out a long breath. There was a trace of fatigue on his face. Then he casually sat down by the door, leaned against the wall and bent his legs. The wind and rain were still very strong, and there was a 3-foot eve above his head, but it still could not stop the flying rain from falling on him. But Lu Chen did not seem to care. He just sat quietly outside the house in the wind and rain, quietly staring at the dark world. The house was lit up, as if a candle had been lit. A dim but warm light shone through the window, a touch of warmth in this dark and austere night. Lu Chen raised his head and glanced in that direction. He found that the window was not far from him. The light just happened to sweep past his head and fell into this narrow gap. It could not enter the wind and rain, nor could it block the chill, but it was still so fascinating. There was some movement in the house. It seemed that someone was busy. Lu Chen listened quietly, not saying a word. He sat in this dark corner and waited. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly there was a burst of footsteps behind the door. A moment later, a creak sounded, the door was opened, and Su Qingjuan's figure appeared behind the door, then walked out. Lu Chen looked at her, and her gaze swept across the surroundings before finally landing on Lu Chen, who was sitting on the ground, looking a little disheveled and exhausted. A halo enveloped Su Qingjuan's body. It was the candlelight in the room behind her, looking like she was glowing. Su Qingjun looked at Lu Chen's appearance, but after a while she walked over, squatted down beside him, and said, "The bleeding has stopped, although the injury is not light. You should have given her some kind of panacea. The medicinal effect is very strong, so there should be no danger to her life, you can rest assured." "Okay." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, nodded, and then said to Su Qingjun, "Thank you." Su Qingjun stared at this man after a while, said in a low voice, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" Chapter 489. What should he say? Should he say that he stabbed a knife into the heart of White Lotus and almost took her life? Should he say that he didn't mean it and was forced to do it? Or should he say that all of this seemed to be just a dream, a joke that could be laughed off? Lu Chen was silent for a moment and did not answer Su Qingjuan's question. Instead, he asked softly, "Can I go in and see her?" Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and nodded. The two of them stood up. Immediately, Lu Chen followed Su Qingjun into the house. This was the first time that Lu Chen entered Su Qingjuan's room. Even when he was on the Kunlun mountain, although he had been Su Qingjuan's nominal disciple and built a thatched hut outside her cave residence, strictly speaking, he had never entered it. The furnishings in the room were clean and tidy. It seemed that they were all commonly used furniture. It could be seen that Su Qingjun was also a woman who loved cleanliness. However, the bed in the room looked a little messy. It was probably because White Lotus was lying on the bed. It should have been messed up when Su Qingjun was busy saving her. Lu Chen walked to the bed and saw White Lotus lying there with a pale face. The soft quilt covered her body up to her neck. Her eyes were tightly closed and her delicate eyebrows were slightly wrinkled. It seemed that she still felt a trace of pain in her coma. Her beautiful hair was a little messy. A few strands of black hair fell from the corner of her forehead and gently fell on her cheek. She looked a little fragile. Su Qingjun silently walked forward and gently lifted a corner of the quilt. She whispered. Just now her clothes were stained with a lot of blood and her whole body was wet. It was really impossible to wear it, so I took my own clothes and put it on her first. Lu Chen glanced over and saw that White Lotus had indeed changed into a set of plain clothes. It looked loose and soft. It was probably the clothes that Su Qingjun usually wore when she slept. At the same time, from his angle, he could also see that at the edge of the clothes on her chest, White Lotus's body was already wrapped with white gauze. Naturally, it was what Su Qingjun had done to treat her. Lu Chen let out a long breath and turned to Su Qingjun and nodded. "It's really troublesome for you." Su Qingjun faintly said, "After all, younger sister Bai and I are from the same sect. Moreover, in terms of seniority, she is probably my teacher. So it is reasonable for me to save her. Moreover." She looked down at the wounds on White Lotus's body and then gently covered her with the quilt. She said, "White Lotus is after all still a girl. It is indeed inappropriate for a man like you to treat her." Lu Chen nodded and said, "It's good that you understand me." But Su Qingjun suddenly turned around and stared at Lu Chen. The emotions in her eyes seemed a little strange. Lu Chen's heart couldn't help but thump when she looked at him like that. Thinking about it, he didn't seem to have done anything shameful. He was a little stunned and said, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Su Qingjun stared at him for a moment. For some reason, her cheeks first blushed slightly. Then it returned to normal. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "I thought of something and I don't understand." Lu Chen said, "What's the matter?" Su Qingjun glanced at the unconscious White Lotus on the bed and said, "She was injured and unconscious. You adhered to the boundaries between men and women and sent her all the way to me. But that year on the Kunlun Mountain, that time when I returned injured late at night, why didn't you do this? But, speaking till the end, her cheeks slightly blushed again and she didn't continue. But Lu Chen already understood what she meant. This time he was a little speechless and didn't know what to say. But looking at Su Qingjuan's unblinking eyes looking at him, it was obvious that she wanted to know the answer. Lu Chen felt a little helpless in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he still sighed and said, "That year's matter, this. Actually at that time when you went out, you more or less violated the curfew of the Kunlun party. This matter can't be publicized and I also didn't dare to alarm others." And, hearing Lu Chen's words, Su Qingjun nodded slightly. Indeed, when she left the mountain that time, she violated the Kunlun's ban for her family, so it was not suitable to be publicized. But when she heard the last two words and saw that Lu Chen wanted to say something, she couldn't help but ask again, "And what?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and finally said honestly, "And when I was on the Kunlun mountain, I didn't know any other women I was familiar with. The only one I was close to was Yi Tuan. But she lived too far away. Distant water could not quench present thirst. Now it's different. You live close, and you are a woman I know, familiar with. Plus, White Lotus is a girl, so I hurried to send her over. It's all thanks to you." Looking at Lu Chen's solemn last words, Su Qingjuan's heart warmed for no reason. Then, she felt an inexplicable sense of loss. She sighed softly and said faintly, "Anyway, I'm not as good as her. You were worried about her reputation, but you didn't have to worry about mine. When she was injured, you ran to her in the rain and fed her rare elixirs. Oh, that's right, when I was injured, you gave me the elixirs that you wanted from me. They were my own, right?" Lu Chen was dumbfounded and speechless for a moment. How could something so long ago be brought up again? But these words sounded a little awkward. But when he looked at Su Qingjuan's cold and calm face, he felt suffocated again. He could only say softly, "How can she be compared to you? Don't think too much." Su Qingjun glanced at him and said, "She can't be compared to me?" Lu Chen nodded and sighed. "You're such a smart woman, how can you not understand what I mean?" The light in Su Qingjuan's eyes seemed to flash for a moment, but then she restrained herself. The corners of her mouth slightly pursed, as if she wanted to scold him, but she quickly restrained herself. In the end, she just rolled her eyes at him and said, "You're full of empty words. Who knows which is true and which is false?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't argue. For so many years as a shadow, he had indeed lived the kind of life that Su Qingjun had just described. Sometimes, even he couldn't tell the difference between true and false, let alone others. However, Su Qingjun didn't continue on this topic. Instead, after a moment of silence, her expression suddenly became serious. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Okay, let's not talk about this for now. Tell me first, on this celestial dragon mountain, how did White Lotus suffer such a serious injury?" Lu Chen became silent. Su Qingjun waited for a moment and asked again, "Also, when you brought her here just now, you really didn't turn over her clothes and wound. Then I'm curious, how did you know that her wound was poisoned and caused her to bleed non-stop? You have to know, when I was treating her just now, I couldn't recognize what kind of poison it was. Instead, you even took out an antidote that could detoxify it." She stared at Lu Chen with a trace of coldness on her face and said, "Why is that? What is your relationship with the person who injured her?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he smiled bitterly and said, "Okay, you're right, the person who injured her is me." Rumble. In the dark sky outside the house, there was a sudden clap of thunder. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew open the unlatched door and rushed into the house. The lit candle shook violently a few times and actually went out in an instant. The room was immediately plunged into darkness, and there were gusts of cold wind. It was also at this time, suddenly, Lu Chen and Su Qingjun almost at the same time, turned their heads to look outside the room. Outside the open and shaking door, there seemed to be only a vast and boundless darkness in the cold wind and rain. Chapter 490. The night was as deep as the sea. In the endless darkness, there seemed to be a pair of pitch-black eyes staring at the only remaining warm place in the darkness of the night. But in the bitter wind and rain, besides the sound of the wind and the cold powder of the rain that came with the wind, there was nothing unusual. Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and then shook her head slightly. Lu Chen frowned and then walked over. Holding the door frame, he looked at the darkness outside and slowly closed the door. A dim yellow light lit up behind him. He turned his head and saw that Su Qingjun had relit the candle. The candlelight shone on her beautiful face, reflecting a strange and gentle halo. She looked up at Lu Chen and calmly said, "You still haven't answered the question I just asked you." "It's me." Lu Chen took a deep breath and said, "I hurt her." Su Qingjuan's eyes were slightly cold, but she didn't show too much shock. It seemed that she had more or less guessed before. At this moment, she was staring at Lu Chen. After a while she said in a low voice, "Why?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "It's a long story. Can I tell you later?" As he spoke, he saw Su Qingjuan's expression darken. He hurriedly said, "Look, I sent her here in such a hurry. No matter what, I don't look like I'm going to harm her, do I? At worst, you can wait until she wakes up and ask her. If she still has any dissatisfaction with me, then you can vent your anger at me." Su Qingjun looked at him for a moment. Her expression softened a little. Then she nodded and said, "Okay, but you sent her here and got me involved. You have to give me an explanation." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I understand. It's just that there are some things right now. It's hard to say. I'll definitely explain to you what happened today in the future." Su Qingjun nodded silently. It seemed that she had accepted Lu Chen's words. After a while, she seemed to feel a little emotional and murmured, "First it was Exin, then my family was in a mess, and now White Lotus has become like this. Lu Chen, oh Lu Chen, are all the women around you unlucky?" Lu Chen was stunned. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he smiled bitterly and remained silent. Su Qingjun felt a little strange. She looked at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen silently shook his head. After a while he sighed and said, "You are not the first person to say this to me." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't say anything further. He just turned around and walked to the door. After pausing for a moment, he still opened the door and walked out. Su Qingjun looked at his back and revealed a trace of surprise and bewilderment. It rained for an entire night. In the early morning when the sky was slightly bright, even though the rain had become slightly lighter, it still showed no signs of stopping, and it was still pattering down ceaselessly. It caused the heavens and the earth to become hazy, and it caused the entire city to seem as if it was enveloped in a misty rain. Old Ma turned over on his bed and muttered sleepily. But in his daze, his slightly opened eyes suddenly saw a blurry black figure not far away from his bed. Old Ma's body stopped for a moment and he seemed to have not reacted. His eyes even closed, and he seemed to intend to sleep for a while longer. But after a short while, he suddenly frowned and opened his eyes to look. Shockingly, he saw a person sitting at the side of his bed. This time, Old Ma's shock was really no small matter. He exclaimed in surprise as his entire body suddenly sprung up, and his movement was so nimble that it was astounding. At the same time, he used one hand to protect his body while the other had already swung out. A dim light flashed in the center of his palm. At this instant, his face was filled with killing intent, and he looked as if he'd already made a killing move with all his strength. But in the next moment, his gaze suddenly squinted as he saw that the person that had appeared at the head of his bed like a ghost was actually Lu Chen. Old Ma was shocked again, and he hurriedly tried his best to restrain the strength of his wrist. But under the situation where he used too much strength, his fat body staggered and immediately fell off the bed with a plop. He firmly lay down beside Lu Chen like a dog gnawing on mud. At the same time, there was a burst of crashing sounds around him. It turned out that the bedding, mosquito net, and other things on the bed were also dragged down by him in a hurry, and suddenly it was a mess. Lu Chen sat on a stool and did not move at all. He only lowered his head to look at Old Ma's embarrassed appearance. Old Ma cursed and pressed his hands on the ground. He jumped up and then pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, "Bastard, you appeared on my bed like a ghost. Are you trying to scare me to death?" Lu Chen looked up and down at Old Ma and said, "You're so energetic, nothing will happen to you. Get lost." Old Ma shouted in a loud voice, and then he picked up the bedding on the ground and put it back on the bed. He still scolded, "Are you crazy?" With a lingering fear. He turned his back to Lu Chen and casually folded the bedding. Old Ma suddenly felt that something was not quite right, because during this time, Lu Chen did not quarrel with him as usual, but remained silent. Old Ma turned around with some doubts and looked at Lu Chen. After a careful look, he found that Lu Chen did look a little strange. He was still wearing the clothes he wore yesterday, and his whole body was completely wet. Even now, there were still drops of water constantly dripping from his clothes, and the ground under him had become wet. This man's face looked very calm, or a little indifferent, but old Ma, who was very familiar with him, could see the faint waves in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes. He frowned, and there was a bad premonition in his heart. He asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? What happened?" Lu Chen slightly lowered his head, and after a moment of silence he said, "Old Ma, I think that damn Baldy. He may really be a madman." Old Ma coughed, sat down on the bed behind him and frowned. "Don't talk nonsense to me so early in the morning. Can you make this kind of joke?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "I'm not joking." Old Ma was startled, and he stared at him for a while. Suddenly, he jumped up and strode to the window of the room. He pushed the door open and looked outside, then closed it tightly. Then he ran to the door and opened it to look outside. Finally, he turned around and locked the door again. Then he took a deep breath, strode to Lu Chen, and growled in a low voice, "Are you crazy? You came to my bed early in the morning to say this?" Lu Chen said, "I'm not crazy, he's the one who's crazy." Old Ma said, "What's wrong with perfected immortal?" Lu Chen said, "He forced me to kill White Lotus." Old Ma shouted without hesitation, "What's so strange about that? If it were me, I would have already killed that woman. I asked you to do it, but it was just to test you. What's wrong with that?" Lu Chen was stunned. He looked up at Old Ma, and the room suddenly became quiet. The two looked at each other. After a while, Lu Chen said in a low voice, "Do you think so too?" Old Ma sneered and said, "The person who should be asking is you. Since when did you not think so?" Chapter 491. Lu Chen looked at Old Ma, and Old Ma stared at Lu Chen. After a long time, the morning light outside the window brightened, and the pitter-patter of the wind and rain sounded incessantly. Lu Chen finally turned his gaze away. "When did you change? People always change, right? But, is the you after the change good or bad?" Lu Chen didn't know. He was a bit confused. For many years, he thought that his will was unwavering. He thought about many things, but he never thought that today's scene would happen. After a while he whispered to Old Ma, "You're right, it's my problem. If it was me 10 years ago, White Lotus would have been a dead person by now." Old Ma looked at him and thought of what this man had experienced all these years. Suddenly, his heart softened. He sighed and patted Lu Chen's shoulder saying, "Actually, it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, "Damn Baldy, he doesn't believe me? So he deliberately used this kind of method to test me?" Old Ma rolled his eyes, saying, "What are you talking about? Do you have a deep friendship with White Lotus?" "No, I don't think so. If you ask me, even if Lord Jinjuan is worried about you and wants to test you, it's more reliable to find that sleepy and gluttonous black dog than to use White Lotus, right? Or, is there a secret between you and her that I don't know?" Seeing Old Ma looking at him with a strange expression, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and said angrily, "Don't talk nonsense. My relationship with White Lotus can't be cleaner. You know it from the beginning to the end. There's no secret." Old Ma nodded and said thoughtfully, "What you said is somewhat reasonable." Lu Chen glared at him, stood up, and walked to the window. He opened the window and stretched his body a few times, and his expression gradually calmed down. Although he looked calm on the outside, his heart was in turmoil. There was almost no one in this world who understood perfected Lord Tianlan better than him. In fact, even he himself did not dare to say that he completely understood his master. Most of the time, this high and mighty soul formation perfected cultivator was like a god, mysterious and unapproachable. Now that I think about it, there seems to be something strange last night. Lu Chen turned to Old Ma and said, "From the beginning to the end, White Lotus didn't fight back at all. She just stood there the whole time." Old Ma frowned and said, "What are you trying to say? Are you saying that White Lotus was secretly threatened by someone?" "I don't know, at least not now." Lu Chen looked at the rain outside the window again. After a long while he suddenly said, Probably for a person like him, it is still too difficult to completely trust someone. Over the years, the damn Baldy has seen a lot of deception and intrigue. What's more, he is actually the biggest shadow leader in the world. Old Ma walked over and looked at Lu Chen's face from the side. He saw that there was a somewhat complicated expression on his face, and at the same time, his voice became a little low. What is a shadow? Shadows are born to do things that betray. They can betray all the people and things that can be betrayed for their original goal, and they will do anything to achieve their goal. After seeing this kind of thing too many times, they probably can't easily trust others anymore. Old Ma raised a hand and patted Lu Chen on the shoulder. It seemed that he wanted to comfort him, but when the words came to his mouth, no sound came out. In the end, it only turned into a sigh. The more outstanding the shadow, the more intense their betrayal, just like me. You are different. Old Ma immediately interrupted Lu Chen's words and said in a low voice, even if outsiders don't know about your achievements, Lord Immortal will definitely remember it. He has always treated you differently from others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have accepted you as his disciple with such great fanfare and announced it to the world. Lu Chen nodded, smiled, and said, You're probably right. But if it were you, even if you view me in a different light, every time you see me, wouldn't you think that this disciple of yours once killed the master who doted on him the most and betrayed the sect that nurtured him with everything it had? Could he be thinking that this disciple of his might be a fickle person? Old Ma said with a bitter smile, Don't say that. Otherwise, no matter what, you won't be standing here. Anyway, believe me, Lord Immortal is still willing to trust you. At most, he just wants to arrange things carefully and test you more. You have to know that the old man has such a huge foundation in this life. If he can't find a completely trustworthy disciple, how can he pass on everything to you? Old Ma's palm pressed on his shoulder tightened and he whispered, Listen to me, Lu Chen. Don't be too anxious. Lord Immortal really doesn't have any bad intentions towards you. Lu Chen glanced at him, and Old Ma looked at him calmly. After a while, the expression on Lu Chen's face also relaxed. He nodded slowly and then said, I know. Old Ma breathed a sigh of relief, and the tense expression on his face also relaxed a lot. However, with his chubby face, he turned around and muttered at the same time, It's so early in the morning. Only you have so many things to do. By the way, yesterday I also asked about some clues about that matter. In fact, but I still feel a little strange. Lu Chen suddenly said, Forget about the damn Baldy. After hearing what you said just now, I also let it go. But if last night was a test for me, why was it White Lotus? Old Ma's expression slightly changed, and he said, What do you mean? Lu Chen glanced at him and said, You just said that if he really wanted to see whether I was completely obedient to him, it would be more useful to use Atsu to threaten me than White Lotus. But he just wanted to use White Lotus. Speaking of this, Lu Chen paused and then whispered, It seems to me that the damn Baldy thinks that if I make up my mind to kill White Lotus, I can prove all my innocence, and he will completely trust me in the future. But I have nothing to do with White Lotus. What secret does this woman White Lotus have on Earth? Why does the damn Baldy think that she is so important to me, even more than all the people around me? He slowly raised his head and looked at Old Ma, his eyes full of doubts. Old Ma also had some doubts on his face, but then he shook his head and said, Don't look at me like that. I am not a person who knows everything. About White Lotus, in fact, when we were in Kunlun Mountain, I have already helped you investigate once. I have told you everything I know. She is a person from a distant branch of the Bai family. Because of her natural talent, she was accepted as a disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan. She has nothing to do with you at all. Lu Chen was silent for a long time, and finally sighed. He could not think of a reason. After shaking his head, he temporarily gave up on this confusing mystery. Then, as if he thought of something, he frowned at Old Ma and said, By the way, you just said that you have found something to tell me? Chapter 492. Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said, Yes, I wanted to talk to you last night, but I couldn't find you. After I came back, I waited for you for a long time, but you didn't come back. Lu Chen said, I was in Kunlun at that time. What's the matter? Old Ma said, It's about the woman named Song Hui. Lu Chen's expression changed and said, What did you find? When I asked you about this a few days ago, didn't you say that no one in the Grand Chancellor still remembers this woman? Old Ma grunted and said, It's true that the Dazayuan is like this, but yesterday I asked someone to find an old man who used to work in the Dazayuan. Now he's old and has nothing to do. He lives in the immortal city, and there's no one to take care of him. He's living in poverty. I went to find him and gave him some money. He was very happy, so he said a few more words. Lu Chen frowned and said, What did he say? Old Ma said, He said that he did remember that there was such a young woman in the Grand Chancellor, but because Song Hui didn't work in the Grand Chancellor for long, she had an accident on a business trip. In addition, this woman didn't come from a famous sect, nor did she have a famous family background, so she was quickly forgotten. As for him, he also felt that this woman died a little pitiful, and her life experience was a little similar to his, so he kept a little impression. Lu Chen nodded and said, What does he remember about Song Hui? Old Ma pondered for a moment and said, In fact, it's what I said before. She came from an ordinary small sect and entered Zhengxianmeng by chance, but she didn't have much success. She was just an ordinary person. Of course, maybe there will be other developments in the future, but unfortunately, she passed away too early, so there's almost nothing left. This sounded a little depressing, but Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up and said, Wait a minute, do you mean you know the name of that small sect? Old Ma smiled and said with a slightly proud expression, I've already been there. Lu Chen also said with a smile, It seems that the sword is not old. Not bad. Old Ma looked calm and said, That sect is called Flying Goose Sect. It occupies a few rooms in the Celestial City. Once it is connected, it will be the headquarters. There are only about a dozen people in total. Moreover, their cultivation of Dao techniques and whatnot seems to be mediocre. Lu Chen nodded. There were countless cultivators in the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, and the number of cultivation sects were as many as the hairs on an ox. Apart from those famous sects with a long history and great influence, small sects like this were actually extremely common and not strange. Therefore, he quickly asked, Who did you go to? Did you get any information? For some reason, Old Ma sighed softly at this time. After a while, he said, I went to ask, but it seems that all the cultivators in the Fian sect are young. They just joined the sect in the past 10 years, so they don't know Song Hui. In the end, the head is the oldest, so I have some impression of her. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said with some emotion, Life seems to be like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. There are only a few waves, but no one can remember. Old Ma glanced at him and said, Most people in the world are like this. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and waved his hand to signal Old Ma to continue. Old Ma said, The head said that when Song Hui was accepted into the sect, he took a fancy to her aptitude. But in fact, when Song Hui joined the sect, she was already a little old. If she was slow in building her foundation, her future achievements would not be too high. But she is a small sect, so they really don't care so much, so they took her in. The head said that when Song Hui was accepted as a disciple, her parents had already passed away. Her own life was also difficult, so Song Hui was very happy to be accepted into the Fian sect. Later on, she was also very respectful to the head. She could be regarded as a favorite disciple of the head, so he still remembers her after so many years. Lu Chen frowned and said, What about the others? Nothing else? Isn't it the same as what the person in the Dazai yard said? Old Ma shrugged and said, Song Hui was originally an ordinary woman. What else do you want? Oh, by the way. Old Ma suddenly seemed to think of something and said, The head mentioned another thing. He said that Song Hui had a younger sister, and she was very young. The age difference was almost 10 or 20 years. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said with a slightly solemn expression, She had a younger sister? Where is she now? What is her name? Old Ma sighed and said with a bit of pity on his face, I don't know. I heard from the head that after Song Hui died in an accident, her younger sister, who was only 4 years old, suddenly disappeared and there was no news of her since then. No matter what they did, they couldn't find the little girl's whereabouts. At such a young age, she had no relatives. In this difficult and cruel world, she was probably going to die prematurely. As Old Ma thought of this, he also felt a little sorry for the lonely little girl. But when he looked up at Lu Chen again, he was stunned. He saw that Lu Chen had a somewhat complicated expression on his face and seemed to be in a daze. Hey, what's wrong with you? Lu Chen was silent for a moment, before he gently exhaled a breath of air. After which, he spoke in a faint voice. Young and lonely, wandering in the world, and then disappearing without a trace. These words seemed to sound somewhat familiar to me. Old Ma was stunned. The rain that had been raining all night finally stopped. The air became fresh, and even the blowing wind seemed to carry a bit of moisture. Lu Chen and Old Ma walked up the mountain. At the same time, Lu Chen whispered to Old Ma, "Right now, we still have to focus on hunting down the remnants of the evil cult. As for Song Hui, you don't have to worry about it for now." Old Ma was a little surprised. "Don't you want to investigate any more?" Lu Chen was silent for a while, and then he raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw the towering and majestic celestial dragon mountain standing towering between the heavens and the earth like a giant, and there were countless clouds coiling around the mountain. He retracted his gaze and said, "Don't investigate any more." Old Ma shrugged. "Up to you." The two separated when they reached the top of the mountain. Lu Chen went directly to Su Qingjuan's residence. Thinking about what happened last night, Lu Chen felt a little complicated. He hesitated for a moment before going up and knocking on the door. After a while, footsteps were heard from inside the door. The door was immediately opened and Su Qingjun appeared at the door. Seeing that it was Lu Chen, Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Come in." Lu Chen walked in, but before he could greet her, he heard Su Qingjun say as she closed the door, "White Lotus has woken up." Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, then I'll go see her." Su Qingjun glanced at him and silently walked over. The door of the bedroom was unlatched, so she quickly walked in. Then Lu Chen, who followed her in, saw White Lotus on the bed. Perhaps she was startled by the footsteps. White Lotus, who had her eyes closed, opened her eyes and looked over. At a glance, she saw Lu Chen, who was beside Su Qingjun, and was immediately shocked. Lu Chen slowly walked over and sat by the bed. After a moment, he laughed dryly and raised his hand. "Are you okay?" "Not good." White Lotus said, "You just stabbed me last night. How can I be okay?" Chapter 493. Lu Chen was choked by White Lotus's blunt words. After shaking his head, he asked White Lotus, "Why didn't you dodge last night?" "I didn't really use my full strength." "You could've," White Lotus interrupted him and asked. "Then why did you want to kill me?" Lu Chen wanted to say something but hesitated. He couldn't really tell the two women in this room that it was Supreme Tianlan's order. It was up to him whether he believed it or not. Once he said it, it would probably cause a lot of trouble. White Lotus had already fallen into it, but Su Qingjun obviously had nothing to do with these things. Lu Chen didn't want to add this kind of trouble to Su Qingjun at all. At this moment, he even regretted bringing White Lotus to Su Qingjun last night. However, it was useless to say this now. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and then stared at White Lotus's weak and pale face lying on the bed, saying, "I know it's a little strange to say this now, but I really don't want to kill you." "Let's talk about it later." White Lotus turned her head away and said, "Anyway, you can't answer my question, so I don't need to say anything more to you." Lu Chen sighed. At this point, there was basically no way to continue the conversation. Speaking of which, no matter how good-tempered one was, it was unlikely that one would be amiable to a person who had just stabbed him not long ago, right? Lu Chen softened his voice and said, "Last night, I brought you here with the intention of keeping a distance between men and women. I couldn't treat your injuries, and I was afraid that it would ruin your reputation, so I came to find Qingjun for help. Now that your injuries have almost stabilized, why don't I take you to another place to stay?" Su Qingjun, who had been silent since entering the door, had a trace of surprise on her face at this moment. She glanced at Lu Chen. White Lotus, who was in front, said without hesitation, "I'm not going. I'm staying here and not going anywhere." Lu Chen frowned and said, "This is Qingjun's house. If we continue to stay here, it will be bad if we bring trouble to her." White Lotus snorted and said, "I don't trust you now." Lu Chen wanted to persuade her again, but at this moment, Su Qingjun, who was standing at the side, walked over and said to him softly, "Forget it. If she wants to stay here, then let her stay. It's not a big deal." Lu Chen raised his head and was about to speak when White Lotus smiled at Su Qingjun and said, "That's great. Thank you, Sister Su." Su Qingjun smiled and shook her head, saying, "We are all from the same sect, such a small matter is not worth mentioning. Also, you are Hakushin Jinkuan's last disciple. In terms of seniority, you are a generation older than me. I don't deserve to be called sister by you." Bai Lian chuckled and said, "My master passed away a long time ago. What use do I have for this useless seniority? Sister Su, you are my great benefactor last night. It is only right for me to call you sister." Su Qingjuan's heart shook for no reason. She subconsciously looked to the side and saw that Lu Chen's expression suddenly became a little gloomy, as if he had thought of something unpleasant. Walking out of the house and all the way to the door, Lu Chen stopped and turned to face Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun also stopped beside him and looked at him with a pair of bright eyes. Lu Chen's face showed a bit of apology and said in a low voice, "I'm really sorry. I didn't think that she would actually stay here today and not leave. If I had known, I wouldn't have troubled you last night. Now that things have become like this," Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "I just said, it's nothing. You don't need to take it to heart." After a pause she said again, "Besides, she is staying here with me. I don't see any big trouble. Is there something you haven't told me?" Lu Chen was speechless. After a while he smiled bitterly and said, "It's not big trouble. Don't worry." Su Qingjun responded indifferently. She then said goodbye to him and turned to go back. "Hey Qingjun!" Lu Chen called out from behind her. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun turned back to look. She only heard Lu Chen say with a sincere expression, "Recently, when are you free to stay at home? I want to come over every day to see White Lotus. When her injuries are slightly better, I will immediately take her away and not let her bother you anymore. Is that okay?" Su Qingjun was slightly surprised and looked at Lu Chen. After a moment of silence, she nodded and said, "Okay, you can come. I don't have anything important to do right now. Most of the time, I stay at home. You can come whenever you want." "Okay." Lu Chen agreed with a smile and then turned to leave. Su Qingjun stared at his back for a while until Lu Chen was far away. Only then did she close the door and return to the bedroom. Just 2 or 3 steps into the room, Su Qingjun heard White Lotus complaining, "This guy is too hypocritical. He likes to pretend all day long. He even said he would take me away every day to see my injuries. My injuries are nothing. He has never insisted on accompanying me. If I were to say that he might have come to see you, some people would believe it." Su Qingjun was startled for a moment. Then she shook her head. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. There seemed to be a flash of light in the depths of her eyes. Although he encountered this inexplicable and depressing strange thing last night, Lu Chen did not directly rush to Kunlun Temple to settle the score with the damn Baldy. After leaving Su Qingjuan's residence, he acted as if nothing had happened. He did things as usual and went directly to the prison in Fuyunji, ready to continue tracking the whereabouts of the remnants of the devil cult. Except for old Ma, he never told anyone about what happened in front of Kunlun Temple that night, so no one suspected him. He began to live the same life day after day. Early in the morning, he would go to Su Qingjuan's place to visit White Lotus and chat with Su Qingjun. Then, he would go to Kunlun Temple or Fuyunji prison, all to deal with the devil cult. It could be said that now, many people could see that perfected Lord Tianlan had gradually placed the heavy responsibility of dealing with the devil cult on Lu Chen's shoulders. At the same time, a strange rumor began to spread in the Fuyun Department's prison. It was said that the esteemed Supreme's disciple was only interested in hunting down the Ghost Elder. In order to achieve this goal, only one person could speak up, and that person was Chen He. After Lu Chen brought Chen He to the quiet room and locked him up alone, no one was allowed to go in to see him, and Lu Chen himself would go to Chen He alone for 2 to 4 hours every day. As for what they did and what they said in between, no one knew. Many prison guards who had interrogated Chen He sneered at Lu Chen's actions. Of course, this was said behind his back. No matter what he did on the surface, he still had to give perfected Lord Tianlan face, right? Even they could not pry open Chen He's mouth. What right did Lu Chen, a newcomer, have to open his mouth? If he really got the information out so easily, wouldn't it seem that the prison guards were all idiots? But about 5 days later, another rumor suddenly spread from the prison, shocking everyone. It seemed that Chen He had opened his mouth and told Lu Chen all the secrets and information he knew. For a moment, undercurrents were surging inside and outside of Fuyunji. Everyone in the prison was even more shocked. Chapter 494. When the news that Chen He, who had always been as tough as iron, suddenly opened his mouth spread out in the prison of Fuyunji, a lot of people were alarmed. For a moment, there was no telling how many people were paying attention to the prison of Fuyunji both openly and secretly. However, things did not go as many people expected. On the day that Chen He's mouth was leaked, Lu Chen had taken the important criminal away from the prison of Fuyunji in an odd way. This instantly shocked countless people. Even the Floating Clouds Agency was in an uproar. It must be known that although the Floating Clouds Agency was founded by True Lord Tianlan and they had been loyal and devoted to this famous True Lord for many years, ever since Lu Chen suddenly ascended to the position and became True Lord Tianlan's only successor and disciple, the relationship between the Floating Clouds Agency, which was led by Xue Ying, and this upstart who had ascended to the heavens in a single step was rather subtle. On the surface, everybody was still polite and close to each other when they met. After all, they were all on the same side. However, in private, inside Fuyunji, many voices were already spreading to Xue Ying's side, expressing their dissatisfaction. For so many years, it had been Fuyunji that had fought against the devil cult with mountains of corpses and oceans of blood. It was widely acknowledged in the world of cultivators that Fuyunji was the leading force against the devil cult, too. However, right now, although it did not seem to have been announced to the public, Lu Chen, who had not joined Fuyunji yet, had begun meddling in the hunting of the devil cult and was showing signs that he was going to seize all the power. In the decades since Lord Tianlan founded Fuyunji, it had gradually developed into a powerful organization that was powerful enough to look down on the entire Zhangxianmeng. With such a development, there was no telling how many people had benefited from it. Although Lu Chen looked polite on the surface, his actual actions showed that he was going to seize the fruits of benefits. Even though he was Lord Tianlan's disciple, his subordinates quickly disliked him. Of course, Lord Tianlan's position was too high and his reputation was too great. Nobody dared to say anything to him. However, Lu Chen was just an ordinary person. Who would listen to him so easily? As a result, the Floating Clouds Company quickly responded. While sending people outside to politely ask for Lu Chen's release, the Floating Clouds Company's internal leaders, led by Xue Ying, grabbed the people from the prison and scolded them harshly. Everyone said, "Have you prison guards stayed in that dark dungeon for too long? Have you all become stupid?" The safest place in the world to imprison the devil cult's evildoers was the prison in Fuyunji. How could they just let him be taken away so easily? Not to mention that Chen He was probably the only captive who knew the whereabouts of Elder Gue. What if something happened to him if he was taken away? What if the trail was cut off and they could never catch that old tortoise again? Can you idiots who look after the prison bear this responsibility? This series of questions that came like a barrage of bullets frightened the prisoners and guards. One by one, they knelt on the ground and complained. Then, one of them boldly told the truth. He said that they had tried to stop him that day. How could they dare to let such an important criminal go? If something happened to him, would they still want to live? But what? Xue Ying and many other Fuyunji leaders asked in shock and anger. But Lu Chen, that bastard, suddenly took out Lord Tianlan's personal keepsake. And as if he knew that it was not easy to explain, he actually took out a personal order from Lord Tianlan. It clearly stated that the criminal Chen He was to be taken away by Lu Chen. No matter how strong Fuyunji was, no matter how great their influence was, Lord Tianlan was still their sky. No matter what, they could not surpass him. Xue Ying and the others looked at each other, then ordered someone to take the personal letter and pass it around. After a while, in the silent and oppressive atmosphere, Xue Ying stood up and expressionlessly said, "It is indeed Lord Tianlan's handwriting." Then, she turned around and left. Zhangxianmeng was the most powerful organization in the vast cultivation world of the Divine Continent. There were many experts and countless cultivators. What was interesting was that in such a powerful alliance, it was like a wall with holes in all directions. There were almost no secrets that could be kept. What happened in Fuyunji spread very quickly. Of course, this kind of thing was not particularly open to the public. Some people with hidden power and great abilities naturally knew about it. As for many people who were not powerful enough, they did not know about it. In the news that spread, there were some vivid descriptions that made people feel as if they were there. In particular, the Fuyunji leaders who held high positions, especially the group of old ministers and old confidants led by Shuang, made people feel that there was a gap in conflict between these powerful people and Sky Shadow, who was very likely to inherit Lord Tianlan's huge foundation in the future. In the past few decades, this was the first time that something like this had happened under Lord Tianlan, who was at the peak of his power. After Lu Chen took Chen He out of Fuyunji's prison, of course, he did not just find a random place to lock him up. In fact, the people in Fuyunji claimed that this prison was the safest place in the world to lock up the remnants of the devil cult. This was also one of the reasons why the people in Fuyunji were angry. But soon, everyone was speechless. Because according to the news that came, Lu Chen carried Chen He, who was tied up like a dumpling from head to toe, out of Fuyunji's prison, and directly entered the Kunlun Hall. Then, the news that came was that he found a sturdy room at the side of the hall and threw Chen He inside. This time, the people in Fuyunji looked at each other, speechless for a long time. No matter how tight the security of Fuyunji's prison was, it could not be compared to Lord Tianlan's, could it? If there was a safer place in the world than Fuyunji's prison to lock up the devil cult's prisoners, it would probably be beside Lord Tianlan. In short, although Lu Chen's action made many people dissatisfied, in the end, no one could say anything, so the criticism gradually subsided. And in the midst of this uproar, Lord Tianlan did not say a word from beginning to end, as if he did not know what was happening below. It was not until the third day after Chen He was caught and brought to the Kunlun Hall that Lord Tianlan called Lu Chen over and asked him, "I say, you've made such a big commotion, why don't you go and arrest him?" Lu Chen asked, "Arrest who?" Lord Tianlan said, "Old tortoise, haven't you always wanted to catch that person and then eradicate the devil cult?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "That's your idea, isn't it? Hasn't everything you've done over the years been for this purpose?" Lord Tianlan laughed and did not deny it. He said, "More or less. Of course I hope so too." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know what I'm doing. Don't worry, I won't let you down." Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded and said, "Okay." With that, he turned around and walked away. But just as he took 2 steps, he suddenly heard Lu Chen's voice behind him. "Oh yes, I have another question. Master?" "Master?" Perfected Lord Tianlan's footsteps paused for a moment and he turned to look at Lu Chen. "I've never heard you call me that before. It's rare for you to do so today. Why, what do you want to ask me?" Lu Chen took a light breath and asked calmly, "I want to ask you, many years ago, when I was an orphan who wandered the streets without parents, did you take in anyone else besides me?" Lord Tianlan suddenly narrowed his eyes and stared at Lu Chen with his deep eyes, but he did not say anything immediately. For a moment, the huge Kunlun Great Hall fell into silence. Chapter 495. Yes. After an unknown period of time, perfected Lord Tianlan opened his mouth. His tone sounded extremely calm and gentle, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. "You're the first orphan that I've taken in and nurtured. Over the years, I've nurtured a few more people. My method of nurturing them is similar to yours." Lu Chen took a deep breath and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. "I've never heard you mention these things before, including the people in Fuyunji, Old Ma and Shuang. You didn't mention them either." "They don't know either," perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently. Lu Chen was rather surprised. "Why?" Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his head and looked at the distant sky outside the hall. "They're all dead. What's there to mention? Other than me, no one else knows about this. You're the second person to know about this." "They're all dead?" Lu Chen was stunned. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. His expression was rather indifferent as he said, "Life and death are just a thin line for those who work as shadows. There's only 1 in 10,000 people who can be as outstanding as you. Be it in terms of cultivation talent or temperament, you have to be the best and most unyielding. Otherwise, you'll either not be able to overcome the difficulties that you have to endure in cultivation, or you'll die a violent death due to carelessness in hiding. There are too many such cases." At the end of his sentence, his expression finally revealed a hint of regret as he shook his head slightly. The corners of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. He seemed to still be in disbelief. "Other than me, everyone else is dead?" "They're all dead." Lu Chen fell silent. After a while he said, "Do you still remember their names?" "I don't remember. Dead people don't need names." Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at this disciple of his calmly. "You're not a newbie. After being a shadow for so long, you should understand these things. Even if it was you, if you had unfortunately exposed yourself and died in the evil sect today, no one would mention you again." Lu Chen was silent. After a while he said in a low voice, "I understand. It's just that when I occasionally think about these things, I still feel that it's a little unfair." Perfected Lord Tianlon turned around and walked into the depths of the hall. At the same time, his voice rang out. "How can there be so much true fairness in this world? You've seen those who were born with good lives, but you've also seen those who had worse luck than you. They were all orphans, but how many of them died on the streets back then? So don't think too much. Now that you've made a name for yourself, just enjoy your life. Don't think about those unhappy things in the past." As the voice gradually weakened, Perfected Lord Tianlon's tall figure walked into the shadows in the depths of the hall, seemingly about to become one with the darkness. Lu Chen looked at his back and suddenly shouted, "What about that matter? What should we do next?" Perfected Lord Tianlon's figure disappeared. Only his voice floated over. "Just do as you think." Lu Chen responded indifferently. Lu Chen's act of forcibly taking away a wanted criminal from Fuyunji's prison had attracted a lot of criticism, and it had also caused undercurrents to surge in Zhengxianmeng. However, these disturbances and dissatisfactions, both overt and covert, ceased after people found out that Lu Chen had actually thrown the criminal into the Kunlun Palace Hall. It was not an exaggeration to say that Perfected Lord Tianlon was the most famous Perfected Lord of the Divine Transformation Realm in Zhengxianmeng. Why would people offend such a great god? In short, if there was any dissatisfaction in their hearts, they would hide it secretly. This matter would wait and see. Who told him to have a good master? Correspondingly, Lu Chen soon decided not to live in the house at the foot of the mountain at Shima Bridge, and directly moved into the Kunlun Palace Hall. His decisiveness was simply a case of sailing with the wind. He did not care about the issue of face at all. Even old Ma was amazed by his decisiveness. As for the black dog at the foot of the mountain, old Ma might have found a large cart to transport it over. Anyway, in the Kunlun Palace Hall, Perfected Lord Tianlon and his disciple were the most powerful. Even if Perfected Tiehu personally issued the no-dog order, it could not control this place. The Kunlun Palace Hall was naturally much larger than the house at the foot of the mountain. Atsu seemed very satisfied with this place. It was very excited to come here and strolled around. After Lu Chen warned it not to leave the scope of the Kunlun Palace Hall, he took Old Ma to the place where Chen He was imprisoned. "Where is White Lotus?" Old Ma, who was walking on the road, asked Lu Chen. "Is she still living with Su Qingjun?" "Yes, she is staying there and not leaving. She probably found that although Su Qingjun is cold, she is actually more reliable than the two of us." "What are you talking about? I am different from you." Old Ma complained, then said, "Now there is a lot of talk outside, guessing what Chen He said to you. What are you going to do next?" "Wait to catch him." They arrived at the quiet room in front. Lu Chen walked over with Old Ma, pushed the door open, and walked in. At first glance, Old Ma saw Chen He, who was lying on the ground, tied up like a dumpling and unable to move at all. He was staring at Lu Chen with an angry and vicious gaze. But even his mouth was stuffed with something, so he could not make a sound. Lu Chen walked over, and Old Ma hurriedly closed the door of the quiet room behind him. Then he frowned and looked at Chen He, and said with some doubt, "Didn't he agree to cooperate with you? Why do you still look like you have a blood feud?" Lu Chen squatted down in front of Chen He, looked at him with a smile and said, "Probably except for you, everyone in the world knows that you have turned to me and my master, Lord Tianlon." After a pause, he deliberately added, "Of course, this also includes your devil cult companions." Chen He's body twisted and wriggled, looking like he was about to go mad with anger. Old Ma saw this and was suddenly shocked and said, "I say, could it be you? I was talking nonsense to the outside." Lu Chen admitted what he had done in an unusually straightforward manner, and said, "Otherwise, why would I be in such a hurry to move him from the prison to here?" "But Chen He, don't blame me. I am actually saving your life. Otherwise, now that the outside world is talking about you betraying your master for glory, who knows when you will suddenly die in that prison." Old Ma looked at him with some disbelief. For Yunji prison had been famous for many years, but such a thing had never happened before. Lu Chen pretended not to see, and seemed to have no intention of interrogating Chen He. He only said indifferently, "How is it? Have you thought it through? You are also a smart person. The current situation is that I have splashed dirty water on you, and I will continue to do so in the future more and more, until your whole body is dirty and wet, and no one in the devil cult will believe you anymore. You can't go back." Lu Chen said to him, "We have all stayed in the devil cult for more than 10 years, and know how those people treat traitors, and with this matter, even if you have a whole body full of mouths, you can't clear your name. No matter what, the people in the devil cult will not open their hearts to a suspected traitor, right? You see, you have no way out." Chen He made a weak but shrill hissing sound. His eyes were red, as if he was about to go crazy. Lu Chen did not care about this and said calmly, "You see, compared to other people who only know how to use brute force to interrogate, I am the one who truly knows what is the most important in the heart of a believer of the saint cult. Those people that you are not afraid of death to protect, actually hate you to the core, and want to grind your bones and scatter your ashes, if you still have a family. And do you?" Lu Chen looked down at him and said calmly, "If you do, what will happen to them, we all know in our hearts, right?" He reached over and gently removed the cloth from Chen He's mouth. Chen He stared at Lu Chen, and after a while, he hissed in a low voice, "Shameless." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, squinted his eyes, looked at him for a while and said, "So, you really do have a family?" Chapter 496. Although they had been captured and beaten by the world's righteous sects led by Zheng Xianmeng for hundreds of years, accused of being evil and propagandized for many years, in the hearts of the people, they were extremely vicious and even evil like ghosts. But the people of the evil sect were after all still human. Of course they would have family and relatives. This logic couldn't be more simple. If only those who had no father or mother, lonely and destitute, could enter the evil sect, then this sect would have been completely annihilated hundreds of years ago. Back then, when Lu Chen was lurking in the devil cult as a shadow, among the core figures of the devil cult around him, there were many family and friends. For example, Master Elder Yun, who was closest to him, had a son and a daughter, and they had a very good relationship with Lu Chen. The elder brother, Yun Jian, was a good friend of Lu Chen, and the younger sister, Yun Shaoqing, grew up with Lu Chen. They had developed feelings for each other, and in the future, Elder Yun had even thought of matchmaking them. Unfortunately, in the far-reaching battle of the Barren Valley, not only did the world's righteous and demonic sects completely change, but even the fate of the insignificant individuals, everyone, came to an abrupt end on that night, and then embarked on a different path. When Lu Chen woke up from the pain of being burned by the black fire, Yun Jian and Yun Shaoqing had already died in that battle. In the chaos, even their corpses could not be found, and from then on, everyone was separated from each other. "Hey!" A voice suddenly sounded in his ear, and at the same time, someone pushed his shoulder. Lu Chen was shocked and turned to look, only to see old Ma frowning at him, a puzzled look on his face, and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Nothing." Throwing the past memories from his mind, Lu Chen took a deep breath. The past was over. There was no medicine for regret in this world. "Do you know why I brought you here from the dungeon?" Lu Chen looked at Chen He and said, "That prison was full of people from the devil cult. If I didn't take precautions, I was really afraid that you would die inexplicably at any time." Chen He stared at him angrily, but had no intention of refuting his words. Lu Chen said calmly, "We are all smart people, it's better to lay things out. Your performance in the devil cult is much better than the real fanatics I saw back then. You shouldn't be someone who is willing to give up everything for those illusory gods. Then, what's left is nothing more than seeking fame and fortune, as well as the well-being of your family." Lu Chen smiled, looked at him and said, "But you have nothing now. You're locked up here and tortured day and night. You can't even beg for death. What benefits do you have?" So, it was for the sake of a loyal reputation that would be immortalized for generations to come. But look, it's all gone now. The reputation that you valued has been smeared by me. Also, how do the people in the devil cult treat traitors? Let me think about it. I'll definitely be hunted to death. You see, I hid for more than 10 years back then. In addition, if you have a family, of course, you will vent your anger. You are an old man. Don't tell me you don't know these things? Chen He's face slowly contorted. He clenched his teeth and stared at Lu Chen with his eyes wide open. A thin trail of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth, as if he had bitten through his lips. Old Ma frowned at the side. He seemed to be a little uncomfortable with Lu Chen's tone of voice. However, Lu Chen did not seem to have any intention of letting Chen He off. As if he was talking about something that could not be more normal, he said, "If I remember correctly, in the devil cult, when dealing with the family members of traitors, the higher the position, the more ruthless they are. Even the elderly and children are not spared. Exterminating the whole family is also common. If there are some lunatics among those who go, then those family members will suffer even more, especially some women and children." He gently exhaled, looked at Chen He and said, "You know, I am not threatening you, I am speaking the truth." Chen He was silent, the muscles on his face contorted. After a while he suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "Your actions, what's the difference between you and the evil people of the devil cult? No, you're even more vicious than us." Lu Chen raised his head, his expression a little strange. But after a while he was heard saying, "I'm different from you." But what exactly was different, he did not say. "Rely on me," Lu Chen said to Chen He. "You are now at the end of the road, there's no way out. Even if you'd rather die than submit, after you die, you won't get the reputation you want, instead, you'll harm your friends and family. Why bother? Look at me, I have the most powerful Zhengxian Meng in the world, the most powerful demigod, and I'm his only disciple. If you rely on me, you'll be able to walk under the sun, all kinds of benefits, reputation, resources, you'll have it all. Everything that the devil cult can't give you, I'll give it to you easily. Not to mention, you can also save your friends and family from disaster." Lu Chen's tone from the beginning to the end was gentle and calm, his words patient and pleasant to listen to. It looked like he always convinced people with reason. But for some reason the other two people in the room, when they looked at Lu Chen, felt a faint chill in their hearts. It gave people the feeling that they were looking at a gentle but terrifying devil, slowly dragging people into hell with a smile. "How is it?" Lu Chen said to Chen He, "I've placed all the results of this matter in front of you. If you still don't wake up, then you can go to hell." Chen He's expression changed, he gritted his teeth, and after a while he shouted hoarsely, "Why should I believe you?" Old Ma, who was standing at the side, sighed in his heart and looked away. He knew that this tough man, who had once withstood torture, could not hold on at this moment. Lu Chen smiled, then reached out to untie the rope on Chen He's body, at the same time said gently, "It's okay, you can discuss these things with me, just tell me what I need to do to make you believe me." When Lu Chen and Old Ma came out of the room and walked to the door of the Kunlun Hall, they found that it was almost dark. They had actually stayed there for a whole day. Looking at the beautiful sunset in the distance, Lu Chen was in a daze, while Old Ma sighed and said, "Congratulations." Lu Chen said lightly, "What's there to congratulate? It's just to rope in a person who has no way to go." Old Ma smiled, thinking that if this matter was really so simple, there were not many people in the world who could do it. "Old Ma." Lu Chen suddenly called him. "What's wrong?" Old Ma said. Lu Chen said, "After a long time, I sometimes feel a little scared. Some people and things in the past I thought I could remember them forever, but now, in a flash of 10 years, I find that I seem to have begun to forget." Old Ma's heart moved, and he said, "What have you forgotten? Who and what things?" Lu Chen shook his head, his face a little blank. After a moment he said, "You go back first, I'll wait here for my master to come back, it's time to discuss the last thing with him." Chapter 497. In the dark and humid night, a cold wind blew past. Unbeknownst to him, it started to rain again. The rain hit the eaves and flowed down, gradually forming a transparent wall of water hanging on the eaves. The water droplets floated down in the dark and dripped on the ground, making a low and sweet sound. "Sister Sue." In the originally dark and quiet room, there was suddenly a call. With some caution, it floated over from the bed. It was White Lotus's voice. On another bed not far from the other side of the room, Su Qingjun turned over and responded. Then she seemed a little surprised and said, "This is the first time you called me that, right?" "Is it?" White Lotus thought for a moment and seemed a little embarrassed. "We weren't familiar before, but now that you saved my life and are older than me, I still have to call you sister." Su Qingjun smiled in the dark and said, "Although I helped to treat your wounds, The person who really saved you was actually Lu Chen. I can't take this credit. White Lotus snorted and said, he stabbed me first. If I still have to be grateful to him, then I can't do it. Su Qingjun smiled and said, that makes sense. After a pause, Su Qingjun looked at where White Lotus was and said, White Lotus, when I heard you talking to Lu Chen a few days ago, I had a question that had been puzzling me. You didn't seem to be controlled by him at that time. Why didn't you dodge at that critical moment? If the injury had been more serious, you would have lost your life. White Lotus suddenly became silent. After a while she said in a low voice, I wasn't controlled by him, but I was still controlled by others. Her words were very vague and soft towards the end. Su Qingjun didn't hear it clearly and asked in surprise, what? White Lotus didn't seem to want to talk about this topic anymore. She turned to look at the window not far away and looked at the shadows swaying in the darkness. She heard the pleasant sound of rain outside. She seemed to be startled and then said faintly, it's raining again. Su Qingjun looked at her and heard White Lotus's voice floating over like the wind outside. She said, I wonder if it's raining on Kunlun Mountain now? Su Qingjun was startled and then slowly sat up. She said softly, what's wrong? Do you miss home? White Lotus shook her head in the darkness and said sadly, I don't miss home. I just miss the things on Kunlun Mountain. Sister Su, you've been out for so long. Do you miss home? Su Qingjun was silent. After a while she said, of course I still miss home. After all, my parents are still there. But I heard that they seem to have some resentment towards you? White Lotus said, when I was still on Kunlun Mountain, I had already heard such rumors. Su Qingjun was lost in thought. Then she smiled bitterly and said, they are my parents. I didn't completely live up to their expectations. But that place is still my home. You're so good. No matter what, you still have a home that you miss, unlike me. White Lotus suddenly sneered. After a pause, she said, my master who died probably practiced that kind of ice and snow martial technique. He practiced it too deeply, and as a result, his temperament became as cold as ice. So I don't feel that he was passionate towards me. But like what you said, we were still master and disciple. Although he died inexplicably, he also caused me a lot of trouble. Su Qingjun was shocked and said, are you saying that Hakushin Jinkuen he harmed you? I was a person who hid under a big tree. I planned to enjoy the shade, but suddenly the tree fell. Of course I was embarrassed. White Lotus said snappily, on the contrary, look at Lu Chen. He's so glorious now. Not to mention me, even you, compared to when we were in Kunlun Mountain, it's like heaven and earth. Although she knew that this kind of thing wasn't a happy thing, but when Su Qingjun heard White Lotus's words for the first time, she couldn't help but laugh in her heart. After a while, she stood up and walked to White Lotus's bedside and sat down. White Lotus turned her head to look at her in the darkness. Even in the darkness, Su Qingjun seemed to be able to see the girl's unusually bright eyes. Don't hate Lu Chen too much in your heart. Su Qingjun said softly. Why? White Lotus asked. Su Qingjun sighed and said, in the past so many years, he has been a dangerous shadow who licks blood from the tip of a knife. I don't know how many lives he has taken. In other words, I don't know how high his cultivation is now, but his means of killing are definitely not bad. She turned her head and stared into White Lotus's eyes, saying in a low voice, think about it. If he really wanted to kill you that night, would that knife have missed? White Lotus was silent. After a while, she suddenly turned over and faced the wall, looking like she was about to fall asleep. In front of the main hall of Kunlun, Perfected Lord Tianlan had already dismissed the guards who guarded the Kunlun Hall. Then, he and Lu Chen, master and disciple, sat on the ground at the entrance of the main hall casually, with their backs against the tall doors behind them. Facing the rain that kept dripping from the eaves, they chatted and drank casually, as if this was a casual and carefree life. Except for the sound of the wind and rain, there was no other sound. It seemed that only the two of them were left in such a huge hall. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the boundless dark sky in the distance and did not speak for a long time. That was until Lu Chen's voice rang in his ears as though he wanted to confirm it with him. So, it's decided then? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, let's do it. Okay. Lu Chen also looked at the dark night outside. After a while he suddenly said, You know, I once called you a lunatic in front of old Ma. Perfected Lord Tianlon was stunned, as if he did not expect Lu Chen to suddenly say such a thing. At that moment, he only smiled and did not say anything, obviously not taking Lu Chen's words to heart. However, there was no smile on Lu Chen's face. It seemed that he was not just bickering with Perfected Lord Tianlon. He said in a low voice, "Back then, I scolded you to vent my anger. In fact, I didn't really mean that. However, is what you want to do now really okay?" Perfected Lord Tianlon said calmly, "It's okay. If you believe me, help me. If you don't believe me, you can also leave the immortal city. No one will stop you." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, "Actually, I'm also a lunatic. To think that I chose to believe you." Perfected Lord Tianlon laughed out loud and threw a wine gourd over. Lu Chen caught it and raised his head to take a big gulp. Then, he let out a long breath and sighed. "Awesome." As he said that, he turned to Perfected Lord Tianlon and asked in a deep voice, "How much time do we have?" Perfected Lord Tianlon hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't be sure. It depends on the situation of the blood moon." Mem. Lu Chen nodded as if expressing his understanding. Then, he turned around and looked at the water droplets that were dripping down from the top of the hall like a waterfall. After a while, he suddenly said to Perfected Lord Tianlon, "Speaking of which, I've been feeling a little puzzled about something recently." "What is it?" Lu Chen said, "It's about you, Master. For so many years, you've always treated the fiend cult as your #1 target. You've been involved in so many battles and killings, wanting to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, the strange thing is that you don't seem to care about it, even though I've brought news that we might be able to capture Elder Gue this time. Isn't that a very strange thing?" Lu Chen turned around and stared at Perfected Lord Tianlon, saying softly, "Isn't that so, Master?" You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.